When I was on a so-called family vacation, I received a strange encrypted message. Fly home immediately. Do not say a word to your mother or your brother. I had no idea that hours later at the Atlanta airport, a lawyer and financial crimes detectives would be waiting for me to reveal a 23-year-old lie that would make me lose consciousness right there in the terminal. Before I tell you how I went from being the family scapegoat to owning their entire empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could keep you down forever. My name is Nia. I am 35 years old and I work as a corporate financial auditor. Growing up in Atlanta, my mother Beatrice cared about exactly two things: our flawless standing in the local Black elite society, and my older brother Jamal. To her, keeping up appearances for her church friends and country club associates was more important than actually loving her children. Last month, I agreed to join them on a luxury family vacation to Martha Vineyard. I thought it might be a rare chance to finally experience some normal family bonding. Instead, I was treated like the hired help from the moment my feet touched the island. We were sitting at an exclusive waterfront restaurant for dinner. It was the kind of place where the waitstaff memorizes your name and the chandeliers cost more than a luxury car. Jamal was loudly boasting about his latest real estate venture, while my mother nodded along with absolute adoration. Next to him sat his wife, Harper. Harper is a white woman who married into our family and immediately decided she was the supreme queen of Atlanta high society. She spent the entire dinner complaining about the service, rolling her eyes at the menu, and making sure everyone at the table knew exactly how expensive her designer outfit was. When the waiter brought the check, Harper did not even look at Jamal. She snatched the leather folder from the server and tossed it directly across the table at me. It landed next to my plate with a heavy thud. The total was over $3,000. Harper snapped her fingers right in my face to get my attention. She looked at me with a sickening smirk and said, "You are a glorified calculator, Nia. Pay the bill. Consider it a tax for hanging around Atlanta finest." I felt the familiar burning sensation of humiliation creeping up my neck. I looked at Jamal, expecting him to be a man and say something to his entitled wife. He just swirled the ice in his bourbon glass and looked out the window, completely ignoring me. I turned to my mother, hoping for just a single ounce of defense. Instead, Beatrice scoffed loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. She leaned forward, gripping her wine glass, and glared at me. "Do not push her, Harper," my mother announced to the entire room. "We all know Nia has been a massive failure since she was sent to juvenile detention at 12 years old. She is lucky Jamal even allows her to breathe the same air as his company." The gentle clinking of silverware at the nearby tables suddenly stopped. Strangers were openly staring at us. My own mother had just aired my deepest childhood trauma in a crowded restaurant just to put me in my place and protect her golden boy. When I was 12, I was sent away for a year. My mother told the entire church congregation and all our relatives that I had a severe mental breakdown and an incurable stealing problem. I carried that intense shame for 23 long years, believing I was the broken one, believing I owed them for simply tolerating my existence. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat, pulled out my corporate credit card, and quietly paid the $3,000 bill. I did not argue. I did not cause a scene. That is exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to blow up so they could point their manicured fingers and call me crazy. When we got back to the massive luxury rental villa, I was not allowed to stay in the main house with the rest of them. Jamal claimed he and Harper needed their privacy, and my mother insisted she needed the master suite for her peace of mind. They shoved me into the cramped maid's quarters near the laundry room on the ground floor. The tiny space barely had room for a twin bed, and it smelled heavily of bleach and damp towels. I sat on the thin mattress, listening to the loud sounds of their laughter echoing from the beautiful stone patio upstairs. They were drinking expensive champagne that I had just paid for, celebrating a lavish lifestyle they firmly believed they had built entirely on their own merit. I pulled out my work laptop to review some audit files, trying to distract my mind from the heavy, crushing weight in my chest. Then my phone buzzed on the small wooden nightstand. It was an encrypted text message from a local Atlanta number I did not recognize. I opened it and my heart immediately skipped a beat. The message was brief and urgent. Fly home to Atlanta tonight. Do not say a single word to your mother or your brother. I have found the 1991 trust fund records from your late grandfather. I stared at the glowing screen, reading those words over and over again until my eyes burned. My grandfather died penniless, leaving us with debts. But this message implied something different. They were hiding something massive from me. I did not wait for morning. I pulled my suitcase out and packed. I was done playing their pathetic scapegoat. Tomorrow begins. The damp smell of bleach in that cramped maid quarters clung to my clothes as I zipped up my overnight bag. Upstairs, the sounds of my family drunken laughter had finally faded into the quiet Martha Vineyard night. I crept up the hardwood stairs, my sneakers making absolutely no sound against the wood. In the main foyer, Harper oversized designer tote sat exactly where she had dropped it, a careless monument to her endless entitlement. I pulled a crisp $20 bill from my wallet, grabbed a pen from the console table, and scrawled a quick note on a piece of hotel stationery. For your manners. I tucked the money and the note squarely under the gold clasp of her bag. Let her wake up and choke on her own medicine. I called a private car service to the airport, leaving the island and my toxic family behind in the dark. The early morning flight back to Atlanta was a chaotic blur of heavy turbulence and racing thoughts. The cryptic text message from Attorney Davis burned in my mind constantly. He had found the 1991 trust fund records. What trust fund? My father had passed away when I was little, and Beatrice always claimed he left us nothing but deep debts and a broken-down sedan. She used that tired narrative to justify every struggle, every lack of affection, and ultimately my vicious banishment. The heavy humidity of Georgia hit me the second I stepped out of the jet bridge at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. I bypassed the main terminal and followed the specific instructions Davis had sent me. I navigated through the restricted access corridors until I reached a private frosted glass executive lounge reserved for high-clearance personnel. I pushed the heavy door open. Attorney Davis was waiting at a long mahogany conference table. He was a sharp, meticulous man who had been a silent ally since I first hired him to audit my personal investments. But he was not alone. Flanking him were two serious-looking individuals in sharp gray suits. Detectives from the Financial Crimes Division. The air in the room was thick, suffocatingly tense. No one offered a warm greeting. Davis simply pointed to the empty leather chair across from him. I sat down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Davis reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, heavily bound file. He dropped it onto the center of the mahogany table. The sound echoed through the silent room like a sudden gunshot. "Take a deep breath," Nia Davis said, his voice completely devoid of its usual professional detachment. "What we are about to show you is going to rewrite your entire reality." I stared at the thick stack of papers. "What is this, Davis?" He slid the first folder toward me. "When you were 12 years old, your mother told the entire church congregation and the local community that you had a severe mental breakdown. She claimed you were a compulsive thief, dangerously unstable and beyond her control. That was the story she used to have you committed to that juvenile detention facility for over a full year." My throat tightened immediately. The dark memories of that sterile facility, the cold floors, the isolation, the constant forced therapy sessions I never needed flooded back. "I know the story," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "She ruined my childhood to protect her pristine social image." "No," Davis countered firmly, leaning forward. "She did not do it to protect her social image. She did it to legally incapacitate you." He tapped a manicured finger against a faded yellowed document bearing an official court seal from 1991. "This is a psychiatric evaluation from a private doctor your mother paid under the table. It declares you legally unfit to manage your own affairs or comprehend complex financial matters." I looked at the forged signature, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. "I do not understand. I was 12. I did not have any affairs to manage. One of the financial detectives pushed a bank statement across the table. Yes, you did, Ms. Williams. Your late paternal grandfather knew exactly what kind of woman your mother was. Before he died, he bypassed Beatrice entirely. He established a massive ironclad trust fund exclusively in your name. The total value at the time was $4.5 million. The air rushed out of my lungs completely. $4.5 million. My mother had spent my entire childhood complaining about the high cost of my school lunches, the price of my shoes, the heavy burden of my very existence, all while sitting on millions of dollars that rightfully belonged to me. Because you were declared legally incompetent. Davis continued, his voice sharp and steady. Your mother petitioned the state to become the sole conservator of your estate. She and Jamal were granted full access to the accounts under the guise of managing your medical care. They drained every single penny. I gripped the edge of the table, the room beginning to spin. They locked me in a juvenile facility surrounded by actual criminals. They let me think I was broken, that I was crazy, that I was a thief, all to steal my grandfather money. Davis nodded slowly. It was the perfect crime. No one questions a grieving widow trying to handle a troubled child, and no one audits the accounts of a girl locked away in the system. But we pulled the bank ledgers. He handed me the final document. It was a massive spreadsheet detailing wire transfers, property acquisitions, and corporate seed capital investments from over 2 decades ago. I want you to look at the destination of those funds, Nia Davis said softly. They did not just spend your money on designer clothes and country club memberships. Look at the primary business accounts. I forced my eyes to focus on the lines of text. Millions of dollars had been funneled through a series of shell accounts directly into a commercial real estate holding company. The name of the company leaped off the page, burning itself into my retinas. It was Jamal Corporate Entity, the very same company my brother now paraded around Atlanta as his self-made empire. The money was not just spent, it was weaponized. My stolen childhood, my locked-away teenage years, the forced medication, the intense shame, the bitter isolation. It was all used as the seed capital to found Jamal's multi-million-dollar real estate empire. The sprawling Buckhead mansion Beatrice lived in, the imported rugs, Harper refused to let me step on the extravagant lifestyle they rubbed in my face every single day. I had paid for all of it. They were living like royalty on the grave of my youth. A sharp ringing sound pierced my ears instantly. The faces of Davis and the 2 detectives began to blur and warp. I tried to stand up to scream, to flip the heavy mahogany table over, but my legs felt like dead lead. The sheer massive magnitude of the betrayal crashed over me like a brutal tidal wave, suffocating my brain completely. My vision tunneled into pitch darkness. The last thing I heard was the heavy thud of my own body hitting the cold floor. I woke up to the sterile smell of rubbing alcohol and the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The blinding fluorescent lights of a private hospital room pierced through my eyelids as I forced them open. Attorney Davis was sitting in a stiff vinyl chair at the foot of my bed. His usually immaculate tie was loosened, and he looked at me with deep, profound pity. He expected tears. He expected the broken 12-year-old girl who had been convinced she was crazy to finally shatter into a million pieces right there in the hospital bed. But there were no tears. The overwhelming shock that had knocked me unconscious on the airport floor had completely evaporated. In its place was something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. 23 years of gaslighting, manipulation, and intense psychological abuse crystallized into pure, unwavering focus. I was not a crazy child anymore. I was a senior corporate financial auditor. My entire career was built on finding the truth, hidden in the numbers, tracing the exact paper trails that criminals thought they had buried forever. I sat up, pulling the thin hospital blanket off my legs. Davis started to reach out, telling me to take it easy and let the doctors check my vitals. I ignored him entirely. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and looked him dead in the eye. I do not need a doctor, Davis. I need Jamal public financial disclosures. I want every tax return, every corporate filing, every loan agreement, and every asset declaration he has made for the last decade. Bring them to my penthouse immediately. Davis blinked in surprise. The pity vanished from his expression, replaced by a look of deep professional respect. He nodded once, pulled out his phone, and stepped into the hallway to make the arrangements. Before I could even ask the nurse for my discharge papers, my cell phone vibrated violently against the plastic bedside table. The screen flashed with a photo of my mother, Beatrice, the woman who had traded her own daughter freedom for country club memberships and front row seats at church. I stared at the phone, letting it ring 3 times. Then I took a deep breath, smoothed my expression into a mask of perfect submission, and answered. The moment the line connected, her voice battered my ear. What is wrong with you, Nia? You just leave in the middle of the night like a thief. You always ruin everything. We are supposed to be celebrating as a family, and instead, Harper is upset because she had to arrange her own breakfast this morning. Jamal has a massive $50 million merger next week, and you are pulling these childish stunts to get attention. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white, but my voice remained small, trembling, and perfectly pathetic. I am so sorry, Mom. I started to feel sick. I think I had a panic attack. I did not want to ruin Jamal's big trip with my issues, so I just thought it was better if I got out of your way and flew back to Atlanta. The lie tasted like ash, but it worked exactly as intended. Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic sigh of utter disgust. You and your issues. You are a 35-year-old woman, Nia. When are you going to grow up and stop being such a burden on this family? Just stay in your little apartment and stay out of sight until the merger is complete. Do not embarrass us. I promised her I would stay out of the way. I apologized 3 more times, thanking her for her endless patience before she finally hung up on me. I lowered the phone. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. She thought I was hiding in shame. She had absolutely no idea I was preparing to burn her stolen kingdom to the ground. 2 hours later, I was back in the sanctuary of my own real penthouse. My family thought I lived in a rundown studio apartment because that was the address I gave them. They did not know about the luxurious, sprawling space I actually owned. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the glittering Atlanta skyline, but my attention was entirely focused on the massive stacks of financial documents Davis had delivered. I spread them out across my expansive glass dining table. I poured myself a single glass of bourbon and went to work. Hours bled into the night as I traced every dollar, every shell company, and every shady real estate acquisition Jamal had made. He had built an impressive empire on top of my stolen $4.5 million, but he was incredibly reckless. His rapid expansion was built on massive debt and highly leveraged assets. To execute this upcoming $50 million merger with the acquiring firm, Jamal needed one specific thing to prove his company was actually solvent. He needed a pristine, flawless external audit. I pulled the official merger prospectus from the bottom of the stack. I read the name of the independent auditing firm hired to review Jamal records and validate the sale. My breath caught in my throat. The firm was Apex Financial Solutions. They were a highly respected firm in the Southeast known for their rigorous standards. But Jamal did not know their biggest secret. He did not know that 3 months ago I had used my own discreet investment portfolio to quietly purchase a 60% majority stake in Apex Financial Solutions. Jamal was banking his entire future, his $50 million payday, and his golden reputation on an audit controlled entirely by me. The very sister he treated like dirt, the glorified calculator he mocked at dinner, was the exact person holding the keys to his financial life or death. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, the burn matching the fire in my chest. He needed a clean audit to get his millions, but I was going to make sure he got nothing but the brutal, devastating truth. 2 days later, the private plane touched down in Atlanta, bringing my mother, my brother, and his dreadful wife back from their ruined vacation. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to play the part they expected, and I had to play it flawlessly. I drove my beat-up decoy sedan, the one I kept specifically to maintain my cover, straight to Jamal's sprawling mansion in the ultra-exclusive neighborhood of Buckhead. The driveway was lined with imported Italian cypress trees, and 3 luxury sports cars sat parked near the massive cascading fountain. I walked up the marble steps and pressed the gold-plated doorbell. I arranged my face into the perfect picture of a submissive, broken daughter. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal Harper. She was wearing a silk designer lounge set that cost more than most people earn in a month. She looked me up and down with absolute unfiltered disgust, her eyes lingering on my plain beige cardigan and scuffed flat shoes. Before I could even open my mouth to say hello, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the floor. "Do not even think about stepping on my custom Persian rugs with those cheap shoes, Nia," she snapped. "Leave them on the porch. I just had the floors polished, and I will not have you tracking whatever apartment dirt you stepped in all over my house." I swallowed the sharp retort burning on my tongue. I silently slipped off my flats and stepped inside in my bare feet. The cold marble floor was nothing compared to the ice running through my veins. I followed her into the grand living room where vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers screamed of newly acquired wealth. Jamal was sitting behind a massive glass desk in his home office, barking orders into his phone with an air of supreme self-importance. When he finally hung up, he did not even look at me. He just leaned back in his leather executive chair, steepled his fingers, and stared at the ceiling. "Mom told me you left the island because you had another one of your little mental episodes," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are 35 years old, Nia. It is embarrassing. You need to get your head on straight because I do not have time to babysit you." I looked down at my hands, playing the pathetic part. "I am sorry, Jamal. I did not mean to cause any trouble for you or Harper. I just want to make things right." Jamal scoffed, running a hand over his perfectly lined beard. He stood up and gestured to a massive stack of cardboard banker boxes sitting in the corner of his office. "Mom says you are struggling to make rent and need a job. I have a $50 million merger happening next week. It is the biggest deal in Atlanta real estate history, and I cannot afford any distractions from crazy family members. The acquiring firm is sending in their auditors soon, and I need my internal files sorted." He walked over and kicked the bottom box with the toe of his designer loafer. "These are the basic expense reports from Harper Division. She handles the interior design, staging, and procurement for our luxury properties. The numbers are simple enough even for a dropout like you. I need them organized and filed into separate binders before the real accountants get here. Do not mess this up, Nia. I consider this charity work just to keep Mom off my back, so do not make me regret it." I looked at the boxes stacked against the wall. He was handing me the internal financial records of his company without a second thought. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and the fake narrative my mother had spun about my intelligence that he did not realize he was handing a loaded gun directly to a master sniper. I nodded, keeping my gaze lowered to the floor. "Thank you, Jamal. I will get these sorted right away." I hauled the 4 heavy banker boxes out to my beat-up sedan, my bare feet aching on the hot pavement. Once I was safely out of his gated community, I did not drive to the cheap studio apartment they thought I lived in. I drove straight into the secure underground parking garage of my actual residence, the penthouse. I carried the boxes up the private elevator and hauled them into my home office. I fired up my custom-built auditing rig. 3 massive high-definition monitors flickered to life, illuminating the dark room. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, cracked my knuckles, and ripped the tape off the first box. Jamal thought these were just basic expense reports. He thought I was just going to alphabetize the receipts, check the basic math, and put them in neat little folders. But I am a forensic auditor. I do not just read numbers. I read the story the numbers are trying to hide. I spent the next 6 hours scanning every invoice, every vendor contract, and every reimbursement request from Harper Division. Harper was supposedly buying high-end furniture, imported art, and custom fixtures for Jamal luxury properties. The invoices looked incredibly legitimate on the surface. They had professional logos, authorized signatures, and matching tax identification numbers. But when I cross-referenced the business addresses of these elite suppliers using my secure corporate database, the illusion completely shattered. The address for a supposed Italian marble importer matched a vacant dirt lot in a run-down industrial park in South Georgia. The boutique French lighting company shared a tax identification number with a registered post office box in the Cayman Islands. A high-end custom furniture supplier listed a primary owner whose name was a direct anagram of Harper maiden name. My fingers flew across the keyboard pulling state registry files and offshore incorporation documents. I mapped out the network on my center monitor, drawing digital red lines connecting the fake vendors back to a central holding account. It was a classic embezzlement scheme. It was sloppy, greedy, and incredibly arrogant. Harper was not just overcharging Jamal for throw pillows and silk curtains. She had set up a complex string of shell companies to issue fake invoices for luxury goods that never existed. She was systematically bleeding his real estate company dry, funneling the cash straight into her own offshore accounts. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the soft blue light of the monitors reflecting off my face. Jamal called me a dropout. He called me a failure. But the self-proclaimed king of Atlanta real estate was about to find out that he was sleeping next to the woman who was robbing his empire blind. The blue light from my monitors cast long shadows across my home office as I dug deeper into the financial rot. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling offshore registry data and international wire logs. Harper was not just stealing pocket change. She had orchestrated a highly sophisticated embezzlement ring right under Jamal's nose. For the past 3 years, she had been systematically bleeding his company dry. She authorized overinflated payments to her fake design vendors, then routed those exact funds through a labyrinth of international banks. I tracked the routing numbers to accounts in Zurich, London, and Geneva. She was not just funding her own secret lavish lifestyle. She was quietly supporting her entire extended family back in Europe. Her parents, her brothers, and her cousins were all receiving massive monthly stipends paid for by the very empire built on my stolen trust fund. Harper loved to parade around Atlanta acting like a self-made aristocrat, but she was nothing more than a common thief funding her white relatives with stolen black wealth. My blood boiled at the sheer audacity of it all. I took a sip of my cold coffee, letting the bitter taste sharpen my focus. I had the paper trail of the fake invoices, but I needed the actual account numbers. I needed to see the direct offshore balances to prove exactly how much she had stolen. Before I could formulate my next move, my cell phone lit up on the desk. It was a text from Harper. I picked up the device and read the message twice, just to make sure I was comprehending her sheer nerve. The text read, "Jamal mentioned you are desperate for cash. My walk-in closet is a disaster and the housekeeper is off today. Come over and organize my winter coats. I will give you a few extra bucks for your trouble. Do not be late." A loud, harsh laugh escaped my throat. The woman actively embezzling millions of dollars from my family was offering me pocket change to arrange her stolen designer coats. My first instinct was to ignore her entirely. But my auditor instincts immediately kicked into high gear. Harper was reckless and arrogant. Arrogant people leave their digital devices lying around unlocked. This was not an insult. This was a golden invitation. I quickly changed into a faded gray sweatshirt and a pair of worn-out jeans, playing the part of the desperate broke sister perfectly. I grabbed my car keys and slipped a specialized encrypted USB drive into my pocket. It was a military-grade data extraction tool disguised as a simple silver keychain. When I arrived back at the Buckhead mansion, Harper did not even bother coming to the door. She buzzed me in through the intercom system. I found her lounging on a massive velvet sofa in the sunroom, sipping a mimosa while a private masseuse worked on her feet. She did not look at me. She simply waved a dismissive hand toward the grand staircase. "My coats are in the back section of the master closet, Nia. Sort them by color and designer. And wash your hands before you touch the cashmere. I left $50 on the vanity for you." I nodded silently, forcing my face into a mask of quiet submission. "Thank you, Harper. I really appreciate the help." I walked up the sweeping marble staircase and entered the master's suite. Her walk-in closet was the size of a standard apartment. It was a sickening monument to her thievery. Racks of designer clothes, walls of luxury handbags, and rows of imported shoes stretched out before me. I walked straight past the clothes and headed directly for the marble vanity in the center of the room. Just as I had predicted, her personal iPad was sitting right there next to a pile of expensive jewelry. The screen was dark, but when I tapped the glass, it lit up immediately. She had not even bothered to set a passcode. She felt completely untouchable in her stolen fortress. I pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket. I plugged it directly into the charging port of the iPad. My heart hammered a furious rhythm against my ribs. If Harper decided to walk upstairs right now, the entire operation would be blown. I kept one eye on the bedroom door and began pulling coats off the hangers, organizing them loudly to create the illusion that I was hard at work. The small extraction program ran silently in the background. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. 10%, 40%, 70%. The quiet hum of the house air conditioning felt deafening in the silence. I shifted a heavy mink coat to a velvet hanger, listening closely for any footsteps on the stairs. Nothing. At 100%, the screen flashed green, indicating the data clone was entirely complete. I snatched the USB drive from the port and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans, just as I heard the sharp click of Harper heels echoing from the hallway. I spun around and grabbed a handful of cashmere coats, pretending to carefully inspect the labels. Harper strolled into the closet holding her mimosa glass. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me work with a look of supreme satisfaction. "Try not to wrinkle the shoulders, Nia," she ordered, taking a slow sip of her drink. "I need those ready for my ski trip to Aspen next month. Grab your $50 and see yourself out when you are done." I kept my head down, hiding the triumphant smile spreading across my face. "Will do, Harper. Thank you again." She turned and walked away, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. I finished hanging the last coat, picked up the crisp $50 bill from the vanity, and walked out of the mansion. The drive back to my penthouse felt entirely different this time. I was no longer just the scapegoat carrying boxes of messy receipts. I was holding the key to her entire fraudulent life in the palm of my hand. The moment I locked my penthouse door, I plugged the USB drive into my main terminal. The cloned data spilled across my monitors. I bypassed her photo albums and social media accounts, diving straight into her secured financial applications. The security protocols were useless against the cloned session keys. My screen illuminated with the exact offshore bank accounts I had been looking for. There it was, in black and white. Accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts in Switzerland, accounts in the names of her European family members. The total stolen assets amounted to over $8 million. I stared at the numbers glowing in the darkroom. Harper thought she had bought my labor for $50 today. She had no idea she had just handed me the rope I was going to use to hang her. The heavy mahogany doors of Beatrice's sprawling Buckhead estate stood wide open, welcoming the elite of Atlanta high society. Her monthly Sunday dinners were legendary events meticulously designed to showcase her wealth and cement her status among the city's most influential megachurch pastors, politicians, and local celebrities. I parked my beat-up decoy sedan 2 blocks down the street, intentionally avoiding the valet line of gleaming Mercedes and Bentleys. I adjusted the collar of my faded department store dress, ensuring I looked exactly the way they wanted me to look, defeated, exhausted, and entirely ordinary. I walked up the grand, sweeping driveway, the warm Georgia evening air, heavy with the scent of magnolias and expensive catered cuisine. Inside the house was a chaotic symphony of clinking crystal, loud, arrogant laughter, and the aggressive posturing of wealthy people trying to impress each other. I slipped through the grand foyer unnoticed, keeping my head bowed and my shoulders slumped. In the formal living room, Beatrice was holding court. She wore a stunning emerald green silk gown and a necklace of heavy diamonds that caught the light with her every movement. She was flanked by 2 prominent local pastors who nodded eagerly at every word she spoke. Across the room, Jamal was handing out imported Cuban cigars to a group of banking executives, projecting the image of an untouchable titan of industry. I quietly made my way to the dining room, finding my assigned seat at the very far end of the massive table, right next to the swinging doors leading into the kitchen. The absolute worst seat in the house. It was a calculated geographical insult. When the guests finally migrated to the dining room, the sheer scale of my family hypocrisy was on full display. The table groaned under the weight of silver platters, roasted meats, and vintage wines. As the extravagant meal began, Beatrice tapped her heavy silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound immediately silenced the room. Everyone turned their attention to the matriarch. "I want to take a moment to thank the Lord for the abundance in this room." Beatrice began, her voice echoing with practiced theatrical piety. "But most importantly, I want to raise a glass to my son Jamal. As you all know, he is finalizing a historic $50 million merger this coming week. He took a small family business and built an empire through sheer brilliance and relentless hard work. He is a self-made black king, and he is the absolute pride of this family." A chorus of amens and enthusiastic applause erupted around the table. Jamal stood up, raising his glass in a mock salute, soaking in the adoration like a sponge. I watched him preen, knowing with absolute certainty that his entire kingdom was built on the millions of dollars stolen from a locked-away 12-year-old girl. Beatrice waited for the applause to die down before her gaze drifted down the long table, finally landing on me. A cruel, wicked gleam sparked in her eyes. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as everyone followed her line of sight. "Of course, God gives us all different paths." Beatrice continued, her tone shifting from proud mother to dripping condescension. "Look at your brother Naya, a true testament to what focus and ambition can achieve." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the silence. "I suppose the world needs all types of people. Some of us build empires, and some of us just clean the floors of them." Several of the socialites chuckled behind their linen napkins. One of the pastors offered a sympathetic but deeply patronizing smile in my direction. Jamal smirked, swirling the expensive bourbon in his glass. They all waited for me to shrink into myself, to cry, or to flee the room in shame. They wanted to feed on my humiliation. Instead, I looked directly at my mother and offered her the sweetest, most utterly serene smile I could muster. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said, my voice soft and perfectly submissive. "Jamal is incredible. I am just so incredibly grateful to be included at this table today. Thank you for having me." Beatrice blinked, clearly disappointed that I had not provided a more entertaining reaction. She waved her hand dismissively and signaled the catering staff to begin pouring the dessert wines. The tension dissipated and the arrogant chatter resumed. I picked up my fork and took a small bite of my salad, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. They thought I was a pathetic floor cleaner. They had no idea I was the demolition crew and the dynamite was already planted. After dinner, the guests migrated toward the outdoor patio and the grand parlor for coffee and pastries. I stayed near the perimeter, observing the room with the clinical detachment of a predator watching its prey. My eyes locked onto Harper. She was standing near the grand piano, wearing a stunning white designer cocktail dress, holding a delicate crystal glass of dark red wine. She was completely surrounded by the pastors' wives, loudly bragging about her latest procurement trips to Europe for Jamal real estate firm. She spoke grandly about importing exclusive Italian marble and commissioning custom French lighting fixtures. She was playing the role of the sophisticated billionaire wife, flawlessly, completely unaware that I knew every single one of those luxury items was nothing more than a fake invoice tied to an offshore shell company. I decided it was time to test the waters. It was time to let the first drop of poison slip into their perfect illusion. I adjusted my cheap dress and walked timidly across the parlor, stopping just at the edge of Harper's circle. She paused mid-sentence, glancing at me with intense, severe annoyance. The other women looked at me with mild distaste. "Excuse me, Harper," I said, keeping my tone incredibly innocent and slightly naive. "I am so sorry to interrupt your story." Harper let out an exaggerated sigh. "What is it, Nia? Can you not see I am entertaining guests? I just wanted to tell you how much I admire your work," I said, adopting a look of wide-eyed admiration. "Your taste in real estate and design is just incredible. Jamal is so incredibly lucky to have you managing all the purchasing and vendor accounts." Harper straightened her posture, preening under the compliment. She offered a tight, superior smile to the other women. Well, it takes a very specific eye to manage international luxury procurement, Nia. It is not exactly something you can learn filing basic paperwork. I nodded enthusiastically, my hands clasped together in front of me. Absolutely. You are just brilliant. I was actually doing some research today for the basic expense reports Jamal gave me to organize. I wanted to learn a little bit more about international properties. I paused, letting a perfectly timed beat of silence fall between us. I looked her dead in the eyes, my sweet smile never faltering. I saw a beautiful villa in the Cayman Islands online today. Do you know anything about offshore properties, Harper? For one agonizing second, the world simply stopped. Harper's entire body went rigid as if she had been struck by a high-voltage current. The smug superiority vanished from her face, instantly replaced by sheer, stark terror. All the blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Her jaw went slack. The muscles in her fingers simply stopped working. The delicate crystal wineglass slipped from her hand. It plummeted toward the floor, hitting the solid marble tile with a violent explosive crash. The glass shattered into 100 jagged pieces, sending a massive wave of dark blood-red wine splattering across the pristine white fabric of her designer dress and soaking deep into the expensive imported rug. The sudden violent noise made the entire parlor go dead silent. The pastors' wives gasped, taking a quick step back to avoid the splashing red stain. Everyone turned to stare at the destruction. Harper stood completely frozen, her chest heaving as she stared at the dark red puddle expanding at her feet. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine, absolute panic screaming in her gaze. She was completely terrified. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I just stood there amidst the ruined crystal and the silent room, holding her terrified gaze with eyes as cold as dead winter. The sharp scent of roasted espresso beans and toasted brioche filled the air of the bustling midtown coffee shop the very next morning. I sat in my usual corner booth facing the large bay windows with my laptop open. The screen displayed the labyrinth of Apex financial auditing algorithms processing the raw data of Jamal's impending merger. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, relishing the quiet hum of the morning rush. That peace shattered the moment the heavy glass door swung open. Harper marched inside, moving with a frantic, erratic energy that immediately drew stares from the morning commuters. Her usual flawless veneer was completely gone. Her designer trench coat was hastily tied over a wrinkled silk blouse. Dark, heavy circles bruised the skin under her eyes, revealing a woman who had clearly spent the entire night pacing the floor in sheer terror. She scanned the crowded room, her eyes darting frantically until they locked onto me. She practically marched over to my table, sliding into the booth opposite me without an invitation. Her hands were visibly shaking as she placed her expensive leather handbag onto the table. Up close, the scent of stale wine and sheer panic radiated off her skin. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I simply closed my laptop screen, folding my hands neatly on top of the smooth metal surface, and waited. She wanted to play a game, but she had no idea she was sitting across from the dealer. I thought about what you said yesterday, Nia. Harper began, her voice thin and unnaturally strained. Her fingers drummed a frantic, chaotic rhythm against the polished wood table. About the offshore properties. I realized that you are clearly struggling with reality again. You are confused and acting out because you are broke. Jamal is incredibly stressed with the $50 million merger, and he absolutely cannot have you hovering around the estate causing a scene. She reached into her designer handbag, her trembling fingers struggling with the gold clasp. She pulled out a thick leather checkbook and a heavy gold pen. She did not hesitate. She scribbled a figure onto the paper, ripped the check from the binding, and slid it aggressively across the table toward me. I glanced down at the piece of paper. It was written for $50,000. Take this and leave Atlanta immediately. Harper ordered, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. Go back to whatever cheap city you want. Start a new life. Buy yourself some decent clothes. Jamal does not need you holding him back during the merger. You are a massive liability to this family, Nia, and it is time for you to go. I am doing you a massive favor here. Cash it today and disappear. I stared at the check. $50,000. It was a laughable, pathetic fraction of the millions she had systematically drained from Jamal's accounts. It was a fraction of the millions my mother and brother had stolen from my childhood trust fund to build the very empire Harper was currently robbing. She honestly thought she could buy my silence with the spare change she had stolen from my own family. The sheer staggering arrogance of the woman was almost breathtaking. I did not break eye contact. I slowly reached out and picked up the check. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, letting the expensive paper catch the morning light. Harper let out a long, shaky breath, assuming she had won. She assumed my silence meant submission. She thought the broken, desperate dropout had finally taken the bait. Then, holding her gaze with absolute deadpan precision, I pinched the top edge of the paper and tore the check perfectly in half. Harper gasped, her eyes going wide. I placed the torn pieces together and ripped them again. Then I held my hand over her steaming, overpriced latte and simply let my fingers open. The shredded pieces of her desperate bribe fluttered down, dropping into the foam and sinking into the dark, hot liquid. "I do not take charity from embezzlers," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy decibel. Harper stared at the ruined check floating in her coffee. Her jaw trembled. The panic in her eyes instantly curdled into a vicious, cornered rage. The mask of the sophisticated, wealthy socialite completely vaporized, leaving behind a desperate common thief. She leaned across the table, her face inches from mine, her teeth bared like a cornered animal. "You listen to me, you pathetic, crazy failure!" She hissed, venom dripping from every single syllable. "You think you can intimidate me. You think you can scare me with some vague mention of the Cayman Islands. If you do not walk away right now, I will go straight to Jamal. I will tell him you came here demanding money. I will tell him you are trying to extort us. He knows you have a history of severe mental instability, Nia. Your own mother had you committed. He already thinks you are completely insane. Who do you think he is going to believe? The brilliant wife managing his multi-million-dollar accounts, or the broke sister who spent her childhood locked in a psychiatric ward?" Her chest heaved as she delivered the threat, confident she had struck the killing blow. She relied on the same tired narrative my mother had built decades ago. They all thought my past was a weapon they could use to keep me in line. They thought the stigma of a mental breakdown would permanently silence me. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and offered her a slow, chilling smile. "You should look up, Harper," I said softly. She frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What? Look up?" I repeated, gesturing toward the ceiling in the far corner of the room. Directly above us, discreetly mounted near the crown molding, was a high-definition dome security camera. Its small red recording light blinked steadily, pointing directly at our booth. Harper looked at the camera and then slowly turned her eyes back to me. A fresh wave of absolute terror washed over her face. "You think I'm just a customer enjoying a morning coffee?" I asked, my voice smooth and conversational. "I bought this entire commercial block last November, Harper. I own this building. I own this coffee shop. That high-definition camera right there is recording crystal clear audio and video straight to my private secure server. It captured you offering me a $50,000 bribe. It captured you openly threatening to frame me for extortion. And it captured me calling you exactly what you are, an embezzler." Harper's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. She looked back at the camera, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles were stark white. "You want to go to Jamal?" I asked, leaning back in my booth with perfect, absolute calm. "Be my guest. But the moment you walk through his front door, that high-definition video gets emailed directly to the lead investigator at Apex Financial Solutions. Tell me, Harper, how do you think Jamal is going to react when he watches his darling wife try to pay off his crazy sister to cover up an $8 million hole in his corporate accounts?" She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to fail her. She sank back into the booth, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. The arrogant, untouchable thief was finally realizing she was trapped in a cage, and I was the one holding the key. Harper bolted from the coffee shop like she was on fire. I watched through the large bay windows as she stumbled toward her luxury SUV, her expensive heels scraping awkwardly against the pavement. She was backed into a corner, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I knew she would not simply surrender. She was too proud and far too desperate to accept defeat. She would go straight to the one person who hated me as much as she did. She would run crying to Beatrice. I packed up my laptop, securely backing up the high-definition video file of our conversation to my encrypted cloud server. I drove straight back to my decoy apartment. This cramped, dingy studio on the very edge of town was the perfect stage for the next act. It was exactly the kind of pathetic slum where Beatrice expected to find me wallowing in poverty and resentment. I unlocked the deadbolt, walked inside, and poured myself a glass of cheap tap water. I sat on the lumpy futon and waited for the storm to hit. It did not take long. The pounding on the door was violently aggressive. It rattled the cheap wood in its fragile frame and echoed loudly down the narrow hallway. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my faded gray t-shirt, ensuring I looked completely unthreatening. I reached out and turned the deadbolt, pulling the door open. Two uniformed Atlanta police officers stood in the hallway looking stern and imposing with their hands resting casually near their utility belts. But it was the woman standing directly behind them who commanded all the oxygen in the cramped corridor. Beatrice. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy pantsuit, her posture rigid with righteous indignation. She looked entirely out of place in this rundown building, but she wore her arrogance like a shield. Harper was tucked slightly behind her, holding a crumpled tissue and dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes, playing the role of the traumatized victim flawlessly. "Officer, this is the woman," Beatrice declared, her voice echoing sharply down the dingy hallway. "My daughter Nia. I am so sorry it has come to this, but we have absolutely no other choice. She is completely out of control." I kept my face utterly blank, refusing to give them the reaction they craved. "What seems to be the problem, officers?" I asked, calmly, keeping my hands visible by my sides. The taller officer stepped forward, his expression severe. "Ma and we received an urgent call regarding severe harassment and attempted extortion. Your mother and your sister-in-law claim you demanded $50,000 from them this morning. They stated you threatened to completely sabotage a major corporate merger if they did not pay you immediately." Harper let out a small, dramatic sob, clutching Beatrice by the arm. "She cornered me at the coffee shop." Harper whimpered, her voice trembling. She was completely manic. She said she was going to destroy Jamal Company if I did not drain my personal accounts for her right then and there. She is obsessed with ruining us. Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. Her voice dropped to a pitch designed to sound maternal and deeply concerned to the cops, but I knew it was pure venom. "She is sick, officers. Truly, deeply sick. We have tried everything to help her over the years. We paid for her treatments. We tried so hard to integrate her back into society. But this dark delusion that we owe her something, it is rapidly escalating. She has completely lost her grip on reality." I stood perfectly still, letting her dig her grave deeper with every single word. "I need you to arrest her," Beatrice demanded, dropping the concerned mother act and letting the ruthless, vindictive matriarch shine through. "She is a severe danger to my family and to herself. She belongs back in an institution. She needs to be locked up before she actually hurts someone." The officers exchanged an uncertain look. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout or cry or act erratic. I simply leaned against the doorframe, projecting nothing but quiet stability. "That is a very serious and dangerous accusation, Beatrice," I said, making sure my voice was the absolute picture of sanity and reason. "To walk into my home with the police and accuse me of federal extortion. It is not an accusation if it is a proven fact." Beatrice snapped, her face flushing with sudden anger at my total lack of fear. "You think you can just terrorize Harper out of nowhere. You think you can threaten my son and his legacy. You are a pathetic broke dropout living in a slum. We have tolerated your presence out of pure pity, but attempting to blackmail my daughter-in-law is the final straw. Put her in cuffs right now." Before the uniformed officers could respond to her demands, heavy, purposeful footsteps echoed from the concrete stairwell. A third man approached down the hallway. He was not in a police uniform. He wore a crisp gray suit and carried a thick, heavy leather briefcase. He walked right past Beatrice and Harper, stopping directly in front of my door. He flashed a gold badge toward the uniformed officers. Detective Miller, Financial Crimes Division. Beatrice immediately straightened up, offering the detective a tight, approving smile. Excellent. The detectives are here. Perhaps you can explain to these patrol officers how corporate extortion works. Take this deranged girl away immediately. She is trying to extort millions of dollars from my son's real estate firm. Detective Miller did not even look at me. He slowly turned to face Beatrice. His expression was completely devoid of any sympathy or respect. He looked at Beatrice and then glanced over at Harper, who had suddenly gone very rigid. The color began draining from Harper's face as she stared at the detective briefcase. He reached into the leather bag and pulled out a thick, securely sealed manila folder. We aren't here for her. He extended the heavy folder directly toward Beatrice and Harper. We are here to serve a subpoena on your son's company. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a masterclass in excessive wealth. Tonight was the apex of Jamal's fraudulent career. The pre-merger gala was designed to dazzle the executives of Vanguard Holdings, the massive firm poised to acquire his real estate empire for $50 million. Despite the subpoena delivered to his wife and mother just 3 days prior, Jamal was pushing forward with sheer arrogant desperation. He truly believed his money and influence could bury a federal investigation long enough to cash out. He thought he was invincible. I stepped out of the chauffeured Maybach and handed my coat to the valet. For years, I had played the role they assigned me, wearing faded department store clothes and keeping my eyes cast downward. Tonight, that charade was over. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown that hugged my frame perfectly. The fabric caught the ambient light of the flashbulbs like liquid glass. A delicate but unmistakable diamond collar rested against my collarbone. I did not look like the scapegoat of the family. I looked like a woman who owned the building. The moment I walked through the towering gilded doors, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I glided down the grand staircase into the main ballroom, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable power. Beatrice saw me first. She was standing near the ice sculpture holding a glass of champagne. Her jaw actually dropped. The crystal flute tilted in her hand, spilling expensive liquor onto her shoes. Harper, who was standing beside her, looking entirely unhinged and sleep-deprived, gripped Beatrice's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. They had expected me to be cowering in my dingy apartment, terrified of their retaliation. Instead, I was commanding the room. Jamal spotted the commotion and abandoned his circle of banking executives. He marched across the ballroom floor, his face flushed with a dark, volatile rage. He stepped directly into my path, blocking me from advancing any further into the crowd. 2 massive private security guards flanked him immediately, sensing their boss escalating hostility. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jamal hissed, his voice vibrating with suppressed fury. He dragged his eyes up and down my gown, his expression a mix of profound confusion and deep disgust. "Did you rent that? Did you steal it? You have absolutely no right to be here, Naya. This is a private corporate event for serious people, not a charity ball for pathetic failures looking for a handout." I smiled, offering him the exact same serene look I had given Beatrice at the Sunday dinner. "I am just here to celebrate your historic milestone, Jamal. I would not miss this for the world." His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale, expensive whiskey. "You think you are clever," he whispered viciously. "You think sending a detective to scare my wife means anything. I have lawyers who eat federal subpoenas for breakfast. You are nothing. You are a broke, delusional loser, and I'm about to close a $50 million deal." He snapped his fingers, signaling the 2 large security guards. "Get this stray dog out of my gala!" Jamal ordered loudly, ensuring the guests standing nearby could hear his absolute authority. "Throw her out the back service exit where she belongs. If she tries to come back in, have her arrested for trespassing." The guards stepped forward, reaching their thick hands out to grab my arms. I did not flinch. I did not back away. I simply raised my hand in a sharp, commanding gesture that made both men freeze in their tracks entirely out of sheer instinct. The sudden display of absolute authority confused them. They looked at Jamal for confirmation. Before Jamal could scream at them to do their jobs, I stepped smoothly into his personal space. I leaned forward, bringing my lips mere inches from his ear. "You are so proud of this empire you built, Jamal," I whispered, my voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. "You love telling the world you are a self-made king, but we both know that is a lie. Did you really think I would never track the seed capital? Did you honestly believe I would not follow the paper trail back to 1991? I felt his entire body go rigid. The arrogant swagger completely vanished from his posture. "I know exactly what Beatrice did." I continued my words, sliding into his ear like poison. "I know she forged the documents to drain my biological father life insurance payout. $200,000 meant for a grieving 12-year-old girl. That was the exact amount you used to open your very first real estate LLC. Your entire kingdom is built on my stolen inheritance. You are not a king, Jamal. You are a parasite." Jamal stumbled back a step. His face lost all its color, transforming into a sickening shade of gray. His mouth opened, but his usual sharp insults failed to materialize. His eyes darted around the room, wild with sudden terrifying realization. The foundation of his entire life was cracking beneath his feet, and he knew I held the sledgehammer. "Get her out," he finally choked out, his voice cracking. "Get her out right now." The security guards moved in aggressively, this time one of them clamping a heavy hand onto my bare shoulder. "Take your hands off her immediately." The voice boomed across the marble floor, echoing with a thunderous, absolute authority that silenced the entire immediate vicinity. The security guard snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. Jamal spun around, his eyes wide with panic. Striding purposefully through the crowd was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire founder and lead investor of Vanguard Holdings. He was the man writing the $50 million check for Jamal Company. He was the most powerful person in the room by a massive margin. Arthur Jamal stammered, his arrogant facade crumbling into desperate sycophancy. "Arthur, please excuse this disruption. This is just my mentally unstable sister. She is deeply unwell and she sneaked in here to cause a scene. Security is just escorting her out so we can get back to celebrating the merger." Arthur Sterling did not even look at Jamal. He walked right past the sweating, desperate man, entirely ignoring his existence. Arthur stopped directly in front of me, his stern features breaking into a massive, warm, and incredibly genuine smile. He opened his arms wide. I stepped forward, and Arthur wrapped me in a tight, affectionate embrace, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, boss," Arthur said, his voice projecting loud and clear across the silent, stunned ballroom. "Are you ready to shut this little circus down?" Jamal stood frozen, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the billionaire investor casually hugging the sister he had just called a stray dog. The color completely drained from Jamal's face. Beatrice and Harper, who had crept closer to watch my humiliation, were now standing paralyzed in sheer absolute terror. I turned slightly, resting my hand comfortably on Arthur's arm, and looked dead into my brother's terrified eyes. "Yes, Arthur," I smiled smoothly. "I think it is time to liquidate the assets." Arthur placed a gentle hand on the small of my back and guided me through the parting sea of Atlanta high society. The crowd of pastors, executives, and socialites had fallen into a stunned, breathless hush. They parted for us like royalty. Behind me, I could hear the jagged, ragged sound of Jamal breathing. He was gasping for air like a man drowning in a shallow pool. I did not look back. I simply walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of his $50 million facade crumbling on the polished marble floor. Jamal stood paralyzed for exactly 10 seconds before sheer animal panic overrode his shock. He spun around, grabbing Beatrice by the elbow with a grip so tight she let out a sharp gasp of pain. He ignored her protests. He shoved past Harper, who was still staring blankly at the spot where Arthur Sterling had just embraced me. Jamal dragged his mother through the crowded room, shoving past waiters holding trays of expensive caviar. He kicked open a set of heavy mahogany doors leading into a private VIP lounge designated for the Vanguard executives, and slammed them shut, throwing the heavy brass deadbolt. The sudden silence of the soundproof room was deafening. Jamal released Beatrice and began pacing the length of the room like a caged manic animal. He ran both hands over his closely shaved head, violently tugging at his collar. His custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a straitjacket. She knows he hyperventilated, his chest heaving. Beatrice, she knows everything. She knows about 1991. Beatrice smoothed the wrinkled silk of her emerald gown, her face a mask of furious indignation. Stop this pathetic pacing, Jamal. You are acting like a frightened child. Pull yourself together this instant. You are the CEO of a major corporation. You do not let a stray comment from an ungrateful dropout send you into a spiral. You are not listening to me, Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with pure terror. Did you not just see what happened out there? Arthur Sterling just called her boss. Vanguard Holdings is not acquiring my firm. Vanguard Holdings is a shell. Nia owns Vanguard Holdings. She orchestrated this entire buyout just to get access to my internal ledgers. She has spent months crawling through every single one of my private corporate accounts, and she just whispered in my ear the exact dollar amount of the seed money I used to start the company. Beatrice froze. A flicker of genuine apprehension finally crossed her perfectly contoured face. $200,000? Jamal continued, his voice dropping to a frantic, terrified whisper. She knows, Beatrice. She knows you forged the trustee documents. She knows you drained her biological father life insurance policy while she was locked away in that psychiatric ward. She knows I used her stolen inheritance to buy my first 3 commercial properties. If she goes to the federal authorities with Vanguard financial backing, we are not just going to lose the company. We are going to federal prison. Beatrice stared at her son, her eyes wide and dark. The magnitude of the threat finally penetrated her arrogance. But Beatrice was a creature built purely on survival and ruthlessness. She did not crumble. She attacked. She stepped forward and delivered a vicious, ringing slap directly across Jamal's face. The sharp crack echoed off the wood-paneled walls of the VIP lounge. Jamal stumbled backward, his hand flying to his stinging cheek. "Deny everything," Beatrice hissed, her voice a terrifying, venomous command. "Pull yourself together and act like a man. She has absolutely no proof. It has been over 30 years, Jamal. The original bank ledgers are gone. The attorneys who handled the transfer are dead. It is her word against ours. And who is the world going to believe? A respected billionaire real estate mogul and a prominent society matriarch, or a woman who spent her teenage years heavily medicated in a mental institution? She was a crazy 12-year-old girl, Jamal. No judge will ever take her seriously. We deny it. We completely destroy her credibility." Jamal stood frozen, his hand still pressed to his red cheek. He slowly nodded, swallowing hard. "You are right. You are right. We deny it all. She is crazy. She is just a bitter, crazy woman trying to extort us." 3 floors above them in the hotel highly secure executive suite, I sat comfortably in a plush leather armchair. I crossed my legs, smoothing the silk of my custom gown, and took a slow sip of sparkling water. In my hand, my smartphone screen glowed brightly in the dim room. As the owner of Vanguard Holdings, my security team had mandated full access to the St. Regis internal surveillance systems for the duration of the merger gala. It was standard corporate protocol to ensure executive safety. I had simply instructed my lead technician to isolate the audio and video feed from the VIP lounge. I stared at my phone screen, watching the high-definition live feed of Beatrice striking Jamal. I listened through my noise-canceling earpiece as the crystal-clear audio captured every single word of their frantic, desperate confession. I heard Beatrice openly admit to forging the documents. I heard Jamal agree to their strategy of gaslighting and destroying my credibility based on my childhood trauma. They had handed me the final missing piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. I tapped the screen, pressing the save button. The file instantly uploaded to 3 separate, highly encrypted offshore servers. The paper trail from 1991 had indeed been difficult to trace, but a live high-definition video confession of conspiracy to commit federal fraud and an active agreement to conceal past crimes was incredibly easy to prove. I watched them on the screen as Beatrice adjusted her heavy diamond necklace and Jamal straightened his tuxedo jacket. They were preparing to walk back out into the ballroom and pretend everything was perfectly fine. They believed their lies could still protect them. They believed they were untouchable. I opened my messaging app and selected Jamal's personal cell phone number. I did not write a long paragraph. I did not gloat. I simply typed a single precise sentence and pressed send. Down on the video feed, I watched Jamal reach into his pocket as his phone vibrated. He pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. I watched the remaining blood drain completely from his face as he read the message. "See you at the boardroom tomorrow at 9 a.m." The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corporate boardroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the massive frosted glass table. At 8:55 in the morning, Jamal sat at the head of the table adjusting his custom silk tie for the fourth time in 10 minutes. Despite the icy air conditioning, a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He was clinging to a desperate, fragile delusion. After receiving my text message the night before, Beatrice had spent hours aggressively talking him down from the ledge. She had convinced him that my threat was nothing but the hollow bluff of a bitter woman. She reasoned that billionaires like Arthur Sterling frequently humored unstable people at public events to avoid messy public relations scandals. She insisted I had absolutely no legal standing and no hard proof. The strategy was simple. Sign the merger documents, secure the $50 million wire transfer to their offshore accounts, and leave the country before I could even find a lawyer willing to listen to my story. Beatrice sat to his right, projecting an aura of untouchable aristocratic elegance in a tailored cream suit. Harper sat to his left, gripping a porcelain coffee cup so tightly her knuckles were translucent. They were playing the roles of the triumphant royal family of Atlanta real estate, waiting to be crowned. Across the wide glass table sat the acquisition team from Vanguard Holdings. Arthur Sterling had not attended the morning signing. Instead, he had sent his chief legal officer, Marcus Vance, a man with sharp, calculating eyes and a demeanor as warm as a glacier. Marcus sat with his hands folded neatly over a stack of thick, leather-bound contracts. Two associate attorneys sat silently beside him, flanking him like bodyguards. The digital clock on the wall flipped to 8:58. Jamal cleared his throat, forcing a booming, confident laugh that echoed too loudly against the mahogany walls. "Well, Marcus, I believe we have kept the press waiting long enough. Let us finalize this paperwork so my family and I can get to the celebration brunch. Building this empire from the ground up has been the journey of a lifetime, but I'm ready to hand the reins over to Vanguard." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen. He uncapped it with a practiced flourish and reached toward the center of the table, expecting Marcus to slide the signature pages forward. Marcus did not move. He kept his hands perfectly still, resting over the leather-bound folders. "There is a slight complication regarding the final execution of this merger." Jamal Marcus said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. Jamal's forced smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Complication. My legal team cleared every single contingency clause yesterday afternoon. The environmental surveys, the zoning permits, the tenant leases. Everything is absolutely immaculate. We are ready to close." Beatrice leaned forward, offering Marcus a condescending, tight-lipped smile. "If Vanguard is attempting to renegotiate the purchase price at the 11th hour, I must warn you, we have 3 other private equity firms highly interested in this portfolio. We are not entertaining any last-minute discounts." Marcus did not even blink at her threat. "The purchase price remains $50 million, ma'am. Vanguard is fully prepared to wire the funds immediately upon execution of the contract. The complication is not financial. It is a matter of basic ownership compliance." Jamal scoffed, waving his gold pen dismissively. "Ownership compliance. I am the sole founder and the chief executive officer. I hold all the voting rights. There is no board of directors to appease." Marcus opened the top folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the glass table. "According to your articles of incorporation, that is technically true. However, our forensic due diligence team finalized an expedited review of your original seed capital late last night. We cannot execute a $50 million acquisition until the true majority equity holder reviews and formally approves the transaction. Jamal stared at the lawyer, his face contorting into a mask of aggressive indignation. He slammed his hand flat against the glass tabletop, rattling the coffee cups. "I own 100% of this company," Jamal barked, his voice rising in panic. "I incorporated it in 1991. I built every single asset. There are no other equity holders. You are looking at the sole owner." Marcus calmly adjusted his glasses. In the state of Georgia, when stolen or fraudulently obtained funds are used to establish a business entity, the legal principle of a constructive trust is immediately applied. Our forensic accountants have definitively traced the exact $200,000 you used to open your first LLC in 1991. Those funds were illegally diverted from a life insurance payout belonging to a minor. The color vanished from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Harper let out a tiny, terrified gasp, dropping her coffee cup onto its saucer with a sharp clatter. Therefore, Marcus continued, entirely unbothered by their rising panic. "You never legally owned this company, Jamal. You have been operating as an unwitting fiduciary for the past 30 years. Every property you bought, every dollar of profit you generated, and every asset in this portfolio legally belongs to the victim of that original theft. Vanguard Holdings will not purchase stolen goods. We require the signature of the rightful owner." Jamal shot up from his leather chair, his chest heaving. "This is an outrage. This is federal slander. I demand to speak to Arthur Sterling right now. You are trying to sabotage my legacy based on a crazy woman's delusional lies. I will sue Vanguard for everything it is worth." The digital clock on the wall silently clicked to 9 o'clock. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the boardroom swung open with a loud, definitive thud. Jamal, Beatrice, and Harper whipped their heads around, staring in absolute horror at the doorway. I walked into the room, wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal business suit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I was not alone. Flanking my right side was Attorney Davis, a notoriously ruthless corporate litigator. Flanking my left was a team of 3 elite forensic accountants carrying thick boxes of financial records. I stopped at the end of the long glass table, looking directly into Jamal's terrified, bloodshot eyes. I offered him a bright, predatory smile. "Good morning, Jamal," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe you have some documents for me to sign." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic impact. Jamal stood frozen at the side of the massive frosted glass table, his gold Mont Blanc pen slipping from his numb fingers and clattering loudly against the surface. He stared at me, as if I were a ghost materializing from the floorboards. Beatrice remained seated, but her spine was so rigid she appeared to be turning to stone. Harper simply shrank into her chair, looking frantically between her husband and the imposing team of professionals flanking my sides. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked purposefully to the head of the table. Marcus Vance, the chief legal officer for Vanguard Holdings, smoothly stood up and stepped aside, yielding the seat of power entirely to me. He gestured for his associate attorneys to make room for my team. Attorney Davis placed his heavy leather briefcase on the table while my lead forensic accountant stepped over to the boardroom's state-of-the-art presentation console. He plugged a small encrypted flash drive into the system port. Instantly, the 4 massive flat screens mounted on the mahogany walls flickered to life. I rested my hands flat on the cool glass, looking directly at my brother. "You have spent your entire adult life calling yourself a self-made visionary, Jamal," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the vast room. "You gave interviews to business magazines boasting about your humble beginnings and your relentless grind. But we are all sitting here today because Vanguard Holdings requires transparency, and your entire corporate history is a carefully constructed lie." I nodded to my accountant. The screens behind me illuminated, displaying a series of scanned high-definition documents. They were bank records, wire transfer receipts, and trust fund ledgers dating back 30 years. "Let us look at the real foundation of your empire," I continued, gesturing to the screens. In 1991, a $200,000 wire transfer was initiated from a restricted minor trust account directly into the operating account of your very first commercial real estate, LLC. But that was merely the seed money, the down payment on your ambition. Over the next 3 years, Beatrice systematically forged trustee signatures and manipulated legal loopholes to completely liquidate my biological father life insurance policy and the entirety of my inherited estate. I tapped the glass table for emphasis. Exactly $4.5 million. That is the true amount you stole from a grieving child. You absorbed every single penny of my stolen $4.5 million into your corporate infrastructure to keep your failing early developments afloat. You used my money to buy the land. You used my money to bribe the zoning officials. You used my money to build this company. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out except a shallow, ragged wheeze. He looked toward Marcus Vance seeking some kind of professional solidarity, but the Vanguard executives were staring at the screens with cold, clinical disgust. In the legal world, Jamal, there is a doctrine we refer to as the fruit of the poisonous tree. Attorney Davis stated, his deep voice resonating with absolute authority. While typically applied to criminal evidence, the equitable principle translates perfectly to constructive trusts. Because the absolute foundation of your business was established using stolen funds legally, everything that grew from that seed is tainted. You do not own this company. You have never owned this company. The land, the commercial properties, the ongoing leases, and the entire $50 million valuation being negotiated today legally belong to the victim of the original theft. You belong to her, Davis said, pointing a sharp finger directly at Jamal. She is the sole majority equity holder. Beatrice could no longer maintain her aristocratic facade. The reality of her imminent destruction shattered her composure completely. She slammed both hands onto the table and pushed herself up, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is a complete fabrication!" Beatrice screamed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "These documents are pathetic forgeries. You are a sick, delusional woman trying to extort my family. You have spent your entire life in and out of psychiatric care. You have absolutely no proof of these absurd allegations. You are trying to steal my son's legacy because you are a jealous, broke failure." Her voice cracked, echoing shrilly off the glass and mahogany. She looked at Marcus Vance, her eyes wide with desperate panic. "Do not listen to a word this deranged girl says. We will have her arrested for corporate espionage and slander. She has no proof." I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic energy. I simply reached into my suit pocket and retrieved my smartphone. "You are right, Beatrice," I said smoothly. "A 30-year-old paper trail can be incredibly tedious to litigate. Lawyers can argue over forged signatures and statute of limitations for years. It is exhausting. That is exactly why I decided to bring something a little more contemporary for the Vanguard executives to review." I tapped the screen of my phone, syncing it via Bluetooth to the boardroom audio system. "Last night during your pre-merger gala, I explained locking eyes with Jamal. I utilized my corporate access to the hotel security network. You see, Vanguard's standard executive protection protocols required full surveillance monitoring of the event. When you dragged your mother into the VIP lounge to panic about your crimes, you forgot to check if the microphone was active." Jamal's eyes bulged. He took a sudden staggering step backward, hitting the edge of a leather chair. I pressed play. The crystal-clear audio filled the boardroom, broadcasting through the high-fidelity surround sound speakers. The acoustics of the room amplified the raw desperation in Jamal's voice. "She knows Beatrice. She knows you forged the trustee documents. She knows you drained her biological father life insurance policy while she was locked away in that psychiatric ward. She knows I used her stolen inheritance to buy my first 3 commercial properties." Then came the sharp, undeniable sound of a slap, followed by Beatrice's venomous command. "Deny everything. Pull yourself together and act like a man. She has absolutely no proof. It has been over 30 years, Jamal. The original bank ledgers are gone. The attorneys who handled the transfer are dead. It is her word against ours. She was a crazy 12-year-old girl, Jamal. No judge will ever take her seriously. We deny it." I paused the audio. The silence that rushed back into the room was thick and suffocating. Marcus Vance slowly closed the leather-bound acquisition folder and slid it away from Jamal's side of the table. The Vanguard executives looked at Jamal with a mixture of professional horror and profound disdain. The $50 million deal was officially dead. Harper let out a loud, uncontrollable sob, burying her face in her hands. Beatrice sank slowly back into her chair, all the fight completely drained from her body, leaving her looking hollow and incredibly old. "You have nothing left, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "The company is mine. The assets are mine. And federal authorities are already reviewing the audio file of your confession. You are entirely out of moves." Something inside Jamal finally snapped. The sheer weight of his total annihilation broke whatever fragile thread of sanity he had left. The polished corporate executive vanished, replaced instantly by a cornered, violent animal. His face contorted with a blind, murderous rage. He let out a raw, guttural roar and lunged across the glass table directly at me, his hands outstretched toward my throat. He never made it past the center of the table. The two private security contractors Vanguard had stationed by the doors moved with terrifying speed. Before Jamal's fingers could even graze my suit jacket, one of the guards grabbed him by the back of his collar, while the other seized his belt. With brutal, practiced efficiency, they yanked him backward and slammed him face first into the thick frosted glass of the boardroom table. The heavy thud of Jamal hitting the frosted glass sent a violent shudder through the massive boardroom table. The two Vanguard security contractors pinned his arms behind his back with absolute mechanical precision, pressing his cheek flush against the cool, hard surface. Jamal gasped for air, his expensive silk tie strangling him as he thrashed uselessly against their iron grip. He let out a muffled, humiliated groan, but the guards did not yield a single inch. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room felt entirely depleted of oxygen. Beatrice remained frozen in her leather chair. The aristocratic matriarch of Atlanta real estate was suddenly reduced to a trembling, hollow shell. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. She stared at her golden child, pinned like a common criminal against the very table where he had planned to secure his $50 million triumph. Her dynasty was dead, and she was entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction. But Harper was not paralyzed. Harper was a survivor in the most parasitic sense of the word. She possessed a predatory instinct for self-preservation, and as she looked at her husband pinned to the glass, she realized instantly that the ship was sinking. She knew the federal authorities were closing in. She knew the money was gone. She calculated her odds in a fraction of a second and decided to cut her losses. Harper staggered backward, putting as much physical distance between herself and Jamal as the boardroom allowed. Her hands flew to her face, and her breathing became rapid and erratic. She let out a loud, ragged sob, squeezing her eyes shut tightly to force a stream of genuine-looking tears down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "I did not know," she cried out, her voice shaking with an expertly crafted blend of terror and innocence. "I swear to God, I knew absolutely nothing about any of this." She turned her tear-streaked face toward Marcus Vance and the Vanguard executives, pleading with wide, terrified eyes. She raised her trembling hands defensively. "You have to believe me," Harper wept, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast room. "I was not even around in 1991. I had no idea where the seed money came from. Jamal handled all the finances. He controlled everything. He is a monster. He would bring me stacks of corporate documents in the middle of the night and stand over me, forcing me to sign them. I was terrified of him. I am just a wife. I am just an innocent wife caught in the middle of his insane criminal delusions. Please, you cannot hold me responsible for what he and his mother did." Jamal stopped struggling against the guards. He turned his head as much as the security contractor grip allowed, staring at his wife with wide, betrayed eyes. His chest heaved against the glass as he listened to the woman he had showered with diamonds and luxury vehicles effortlessly throw him to the federal wolves. Beatrice finally found her voice, letting out a sharp, horrified gasp. "Harper, you treacherous little viper!" Harper ignored her mother-in-law, completely stepping closer to my legal team and clasping her hands together in a posture of pure, desperate prayer. "Nia, please," she begged, locking her watery eyes onto mine. "You know what he is like. You know how manipulative he can be. I am a victim here too. He lied to me just like he lied to you." I watched her performance with absolute icy detachment. It was a spectacular display of self-serving theatricality, but it lacked one crucial element. It lacked the truth. "You play the victim beautifully, Harper," I said, my voice slicing through her manufactured sobs like a razor. "You have spent your entire marriage pretending to be a vapid, clueless socialite, happily spending money you never earned. But innocent, terrified wives do not systematically establish offshore shell corporations." Harper fake tears stopped instantly. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very sick. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides. I raised the small presentation remote in my hand and clicked the forward button. The four massive flat screens mounted on the mahogany walls shifted instantly. The 1991 trust fund documents vanished, replaced by a complex spider web of international bank statements, wire routing numbers, and encrypted offshore corporate registries. The Vanguard executives leaned forward, their professional curiosity piqued. Attorney Davis adjusted his glasses, stepping aside so the entire room had a clear, unobstructed view of the financial evidence. While Jamal was busy playing the visionary king of real estate, you were busy bleeding his operating accounts completely dry, I explained, gesturing to the highlighted columns on the screen. Over the past 36 months, you have authorized 142 separate wire transfers from the company primary holding accounts. You routed those funds through 3 different dummy corporations registered in Delaware, before funneling them directly into a private shielded account in the Cayman Islands. An account registered exclusively under your maiden name. Harper opened her mouth, but she was entirely rendered mute. She took a slow, terrified step backward, bumping into the edge of a credenza. $200,000 here. I continued reading the figures off the screen. $500,000 there. You siphoned the capital so carefully and so consistently that Jamal's grossly incompetent accounting department never even flagged the missing liquidity. You were preparing to abandon him the moment this merger cleared. You were going to take the money and vanish. I looked directly at Harper, my expression completely devoid of mercy. "The total amount of stolen capital sitting in your Cayman account as of this morning is exactly $8 million. Jamal let out a sound that did not even seem human. It was a guttural, choked roar of pure, absolute agony. He strained against the security guards, his muscles bulging under his expensive suit, as he twisted his neck to stare at the presentation screens. He read the routing numbers. He saw his wife's maiden name clearly printed at the top of the offshore registry documents. The man who had built his entire identity on stealing my inheritance had been systematically robbed blind by the woman sleeping in his bed. "You miserable thief!" Jamal screamed, spit flying from his lips as he thrashed violently against the frosted glass. "I gave you everything. I built this empire for us, and you stole from me. You stole my money." "It was never your money, Jamal," I reminded him coldly. Beatrice slumped back into her leather chair, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. She looked between her pinned, disgraced son and her criminal daughter-in-law. The pristine, flawless legacy she had meticulously curated for 3 decades was now exposed as a toxic, radioactive swamp of fraud and betrayal. Her family was not a dynasty. They were a cartel of thieves turning on each other the second the lights came on. Marcus Vance stood up. The chief legal officer of Vanguard Holdings had seen entirely enough. He smoothed his suit jacket and reached down, snapping his heavy leather briefcase shut, with a loud, definitive crack that echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. His 2 associate attorneys immediately followed his lead, gathering their pristine, unmarked contracts and slipping them back into their bags. "Vanguard Holdings operates with strict compliance and absolute corporate integrity," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with frigid finality. "We do not acquire stolen portfolios. We do not purchase assets built on the systematic defrauding of a minor. And we certainly do not insert ourselves into active federal crime scenes." He looked down at Jamal, who was still pinned against the glass, his face contorted with rage and devastation. "This transaction is formally terminated," Marcus declared. "Vanguard is withdrawing from the merger entirely effective immediately. Our legal department will be cooperating fully with the federal authorities regarding the financial irregularities we have uncovered during our due diligence." Marcus turned to me, offering a brief, respectful nod. "Ms. Davis." He turned on his heel and strode purposefully out of the boardroom, his legal team trailing silently behind him. The heavy oak doors swung shut, leaving Jamal, Beatrice, and Harper trapped in the room with me, my attorneys, and the absolute, undeniable ruin of their lives. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Marcus Vance, sealing the room like a tomb. The sound echoed with a brutal finality. The $50 million lifeline was gone. The prestige was gone. The entire Vanguard acquisition had dissolved into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the stench of 30 years of fraud. Jamal had stopped thrashing against the frosted glass. The private security contractors held him down with effortless strength, but the fight had completely left his body. He was panting heavily, a thin line of saliva pooling on the glass near his cheek. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and locked in a dead stare on the massive flat screens above. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the undeniable proof of his wife's offshore accounts. Harper stood pressed against the far mahogany wall, clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a shield. She was edging slowly toward the exit, inch by desperate inch, calculating whether she could slip past my forensic accountants. Attorney Davis simply stepped sideways, physically blocking her path. Harper froze, shrinking back into the wood paneling, a trapped rat in a silk dress. But my attention shifted away from the thieves and settled on the architect of my misery. Beatrice was still sitting in her high-backed leather chair, but she seemed to have shrunk. The commanding, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was dissolving right in front of my eyes. Her perfectly structured posture had collapsed. Her hands trembled violently in her lap. For 30 years, Beatrice had navigated the world with the absolute arrogance of a woman who believed she was untouchable. She had constructed a golden pedestal out of my stolen inheritance, positioning herself as a pillar of grace, philanthropy, and moral superiority. Now the pedestal had been kicked out from under her. She looked around the opulent boardroom, the nerve center of the empire she thought she ruled, and realized she owned absolutely nothing. She saw her golden son humiliated and pinned to a table. She saw her daughter-in-law exposed as a parasitic embezzler. Then her dark, frantic eyes locked onto mine. I stood at the head of the table, flanked by a team of elite professionals who answered only to me. I was no longer the frightened 12-year-old girl she had drugged and locked away in a psychiatric ward. I was not the silenced, discarded daughter she had erased from her pristine family portrait. I was the absolute owner of every asset, every property, and every dollar she had ever claimed as her own. I watched the exact moment her narcissistic survival instincts kicked into overdrive. A narcissist does not experience genuine remorse. When cornered, they simply change characters. They pivot from the oppressor to the victim with seamless, terrifying speed. Beatrice pushed herself out of the leather chair. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to brace her hand against the edge of the glass table to keep from falling. She stumbled forward, her breathing ragged, her eyes welling up with sudden torrential tears. The icy arrogance was gone, replaced by a mask of profound, agonizing maternal desperation. She crossed the distance between us, her expensive heels dragging against the floor. Before my security or Attorney Davis could intervene, Beatrice collapsed. She dropped heavily to her knees right in front of me. The thud of her bones hitting the hardwood floor was loud and pathetic. She reached out with trembling hands, her manicured fingers desperately grasping the fabric of my tailored suit. She clung to me as if she were drowning, and I was the last piece of floating wreckage in the ocean. "I did it for the family, Nia," Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking with violent, racking sobs. "We had to survive. You must forgive your mother." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and smeared makeup, a portrait of manufactured agony. She gripped the fabric of my suit tighter, her knuckles turning white. "I was just a desperate mother trying to keep a roof over our heads," Beatrice pleaded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I made terrible mistakes, I know that now. But everything I did to protect us. To protect Jamal, to protect you. You are my flesh and blood. You are my daughter. Please, Nia, have mercy on your family. She bowed her head, pressing her face against my legs, weeping loudly. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. For a fraction of a second, I felt the phantom echo of that lonely, terrified child inside me, the little girl who had spent years begging for a scrap of this woman affection. But that child had died in the cold, sterile room of a psychiatric ward 30 years ago. The woman standing here now felt nothing but absolute freezing clarity. I looked down at the top of her perfectly styled head. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. The calmness of my tone was a weapon far sharper than rage. You didn't do it for the family, I said, my voice echoing evenly across the silent boardroom. I took a deliberate, measured step backward. Bereft of my support, Beatrice lost her balance. She fell forward, her hands slapping against the polished hardwood floor to catch herself. She stayed there on all fours, staring up at me in shock as the final veil of her delusion was torn away. You did it for a country club membership and a front row seat at church, I stated, looking down at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. You traded your daughter for a zip code. You locked a grieving 12-year-old girl in a mental institution so you could buy designer clothes and throw charity galas with stolen money. There was no survival involved, Beatrice. It was just pure unchecked greed. Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came. The absolute rejection in my eyes paralyzed her. She realized in that shattering moment that her tears had no currency here. Her manipulation had completely lost its power. She was bankrupt in every conceivable way. Attorney Davis adjusted his suit jacket and glanced at his luxury wristwatch. Right on schedule, he murmured. From the hallway outside the boardroom, a sudden commotion erupted. The sound of heavy-booted footsteps echoed against the marble floors, moving with swift, organized aggression. Men were shouting sharp, authoritative commands, securing the perimeter of the executive suite. Harper let out a high, thin scream, pressing herself desperately against the far wall as if trying to melt into the wood paneling. Jamal finally lifted his head from the glass table, a look of ultimate dread washing over his bruised face. The boardroom doors open again. The FBI and local police enter with arrest warrants. A team of federal agents and tactical windbreakers flooded into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their holstered weapons. Behind them, a squad of local Atlanta police officers filed in, blocking the exit and securing the hallway. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern face, stepped directly into the center of the room. He held up a thick stack of manila folders, the bright blue ink of federal arrest warrants stamped clearly across the front. Jamal and Beatrice Sterling, the agent, announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and federal tax evasion. Harper Sterling, you are under arrest for international embezzlement and offshore tax fraud. The trap had officially snapped shut. Two federal agents moved swiftly across the boardroom, flanking Jamal with practiced precision. The metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists sliced through the dead silence of the room. The sound was sharp and unforgiving. Jamal did not resist. He stood completely limp, his eyes still darting wildly toward the flat screens that displayed the irrefutable evidence of his wife's offshore accounts. His $50 million fantasy had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, broken shell of a man. The visionary CEO persona he had meticulously cultivated for decades had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. A few feet away, Beatrice scrambled backward on the hardwood floor as a female Atlanta police officer approached her with an open pair of cuffs. She held up her trembling, manicured hands as if trying to physically ward off the inevitable. You cannot do this. Beatrice gasped, her voice shaking with an indignant, frantic panic. Do you know who I am? I sit on the board of the Atlanta Symphony. I am a founding member of the Heritage Country Club. I host charity galas for the mayor. You are making a catastrophic mistake. You cannot arrest me like a common criminal. The officer did not hesitate, And she certainly did not care about the Heritage Country Club. She grabbed Beatrice by the wrist, twisting her arms behind her back with a firm, uncompromising motion. "Beatrice Sterling, you have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, her voice a flat professional monotone over the sound of clicking steel. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are being charged with 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of federal wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft." On the opposite side of the long glass table, Harper was backed into a corner, her chest heaving. 2 federal agents, one a tall, broad-shouldered black man, and his equally imposing black female partner, stepped toward her. Harper dropped her designer handbag. The crocodile leather hit the floor, spilling expensive cosmetics and a gold-plated compact across the polished wood. "Do not touch me!" Harper shrieked, slapping the male agent hand away. "I told you I am a victim. I am the wife. I did not do anything wrong. You have the wrong person." The female agent stepped in, grabbing Harper's arm and spinning her around against the mahogany wall. "Harper Sterling, you are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, offshore tax fraud, and money laundering," the agent stated calmly, securing the first cuff. The cold touch of the steel snapped whatever fragile restraint Harper had left. The terrified innocent wife persona melted away instantly, revealing the rotting toxic core of her character. She thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels against the agent's shins. "Get your filthy hands off me, you animals!" Harper screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She spat a barrage of vile racist slurs directly at the 2 federal officers, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "You are nothing but hired thugs. You work for people like me. You do not get to touch someone like me. Take these off me right now." She violently thrashed her head around, locking her manicured glare onto me. "And you?" Harper spat her words, dripping with an entitled, vicious rage. "You think you are so smart. You think because you have a little money now, you are equal to us. You will never be one of us. You are just a bitter ghetto trash dropout who got lucky. You do not belong in this room. You do not belong in this building. You are nothing." I stood perfectly still at the head of the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not frown. I reached out toward the center of the frosted glass table and picked up a heavy crystal carafe. I poured a glass of iced, sparkling water, listening to the gentle clinking of the ice cubes against the glass. The sound was incredibly crisp and clear in the space between Harper's violent screams. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The water was refreshing. I swallowed and set the glass down, smoothing the lapel of my tailored charcoal suit. "The irony, Harper," I said, my tone conversational and completely unaffected by her tantrum, "is that I literally own this building now, and as the absolute owner, I am officially trespassing you from the premises." The federal agents tightened their grip on Harper's arms, lifting her slightly off her feet. Her racist screaming devolved into animalistic shrieks as they marched her toward the heavy oak doors. Behind her, Beatrice was crying openly, her aristocratic posture entirely decimated as she was paraded past the Vanguard security contractors and my forensic accounting team. She refused to look at me, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Jamal was the last to be moved. The agents pulled him upright. His custom tuxedo jacket was rumpled, and his silk tie was completely askew. He looked like a man waking up from a 30-year coma to find himself trapped in a nightmare he could not escape. The procession moved out of the executive boardroom and into the expansive marble hallway. I followed them, my security team matching my steady, measured pace. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, the very city Jamal and Beatrice thought they ruled. The federal agents pressed the call button for the private executive elevator. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft melodic chime. Inside the elevator bank, a janitorial cart had been temporarily pushed to the side, a bucket of soapy water and a commercial string mop resting against the brass railing. The agents guided Beatrice and Harper into the elevator car. Harper was still sobbing and hurling insults, though her voice was growing hoarse and broken. As the agents moved to push Jamal inside the car, I stepped forward, raising a single hand to halt them. I reached into the janitorial cart and pulled out the heavy, wet mop. The soapy water dripped onto the pristine marble floor. I held the wooden handle out, offering it directly to my brother. He stared at it, his bloodshot eyes uncomprehending and wide with sheer terror. "Take it, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. I shoved the mop handle hard against his chest, forcing him to instinctively grasp it with his cuffed hands to keep it from falling. "You spent your whole life stealing everything I had to build a fake kingdom," I told him. "Now it is time for a new career. Someone has to clean the floors of this empire." 1 month later, the dust had settled and the corporate bloodbath was complete. I walked through the double-glass doors of the executive suite, not as a challenger, but as the absolute undisputed owner. The federal courts had moved with unprecedented speed, given the sheer mountain of irrefutable evidence. Jamal and Beatrice had their assets completely frozen within 48 hours of their arrest. By the end of the third week, a federal judge ruled that the entire real estate portfolio had been built directly on the foundation of my stolen inheritance. The ruling was absolute. 100% of the company, its subsidiaries, and every single real estate asset was legally transferred into my name. I sat behind Jamal, massive custom mahogany desk, running my hands slowly along the polished wood edge. The corner office was a monument to his ego, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he thought he had conquered. I hated the space. I hated the dark, oppressive wood, the heavy leather furniture, and the lingering faint scent of his expensive cologne. I had already ordered a complete demolition and redesign of the entire floor, but for today, this desk served its final purpose. I was systematically dismantling his corporate structure. I spent the morning firing every single executive who had been complicit in his fraudulent schemes. They were escorted out of the building by the same private security team that had pinned Jamal to the boardroom table. I elevated the junior analysts and mid-level managers who had actually been keeping the company afloat while Jamal played king. I rebranded the entire entity, severing any remaining ties to the toxic legacy of my adoptive family. Attorney Davis walked into the office carrying a sleek black leather folder. He placed it directly in the center of the mahogany desk and stepped back, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The residential properties have been fully processed, Ms. Davis," he announced, "including the primary estate in Buckhead." I opened the folder. Resting on top was the official deed to Beatrice's sprawling $10 million mansion. The very house she had purchased by draining my father trust fund. Beatrice was currently sitting inside that massive empty estate, out on a severely restricted bail awaiting her federal trial. She was wearing a GPS ankle monitor, stripped of her passport, her bank accounts, and her beloved social standing. But she was still sleeping in a king-sized bed, surrounded by stolen luxury. It was time to fix that. I picked up my pen and signed the official eviction notice with a bold, fluid stroke. When I was 12 years old, Beatrice had decided I was no longer a convenient prop for her grieving mother routine. The day she had me dragged out of the house and committed to that horrific psychiatric facility, she did not even wait for my bed to get cold. She hired a crew of cheap, aggressive movers to clear out my bedroom. I vividly remembered watching from the back window of a transport vehicle as burly men carelessly tossed my childhood belongings, my books, my stuffed animals, my father photographs into heavy cardboard boxes and dumped them on the curb like trash. I had never forgotten the name printed on the side of that moving truck. "Did you secure the specific contractors I requested?" I asked, looking up at Attorney Davis. "Yes, we did," he confirmed. "They are waiting for your signal." It took some digging to find the exact same company from all those years ago, but they are ready. "Excellent," I replied, sliding the signed eviction notice across the desk. "Send them to Buckhead immediately. Beatrice has exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. Tell the movers they are not to offer any special treatment. I want her designer clothes, her antique vases, and her expensive crystals shoved into standard cardboard boxes with zero regard for their fragility. If she resists or refuses to leave, the local sheriff deputies are on standby to physically remove her for trespassing." Attorney Davis nodded, his expression radiating professional satisfaction. He took the folder and left the office to execute the final devastating blow to Beatrice's fake aristocratic life. Alone in the sprawling office, I stood up from the mahogany desk and walked over to the far wall. The room was mostly bare now, stripped of Jamal's endless self-congratulatory awards and magazine covers. But there was one piece of art remaining, a massive, ugly, abstract painting that Jamal had paid $500,000 for. I reached behind the heavy canvas and pulled hard, swinging the frame outward on its hidden hinges. Behind it, embedded deep into the concrete wall, was a heavy steel safe. My forensic accounting team had cracked the digital code during the initial raid, leaving the safe unlocked. They had already cataloged and removed the financial ledgers, the offshore account routing numbers, and the fake corporate seals Jamal had used to hide his crimes. They had informed me that the only things left inside were a few personal items devoid of financial value. I wanted the safe completely cleared before the demolition crew arrived in the morning. I gripped the heavy steel handle and pulled the heavy door open. The interior was dark and smelled of stale air and aged paper. I reached inside, pulling out a few discarded tie clips, an empty velvet watch box, and a stack of old property deeds that had long since expired. I tossed them carelessly into a trash can. I reached back into the darkest corner of the bottom shelf, my fingers brushing against the cold steel. There was something wedged tightly into the back crevice. I pressed my hand flat, feeling the edges of a thick, heavy envelope. I pulled it out into the light of the corner office. It was not a modern corporate document. It was an old, slightly yellowed parchment envelope, heavy and thick with age. It was sealed shut, with a dark red wax stamp that had cracked slightly down the middle. My breath caught in my throat, perfectly stilling my lungs. I stared down at the front of the envelope. The ink was faded, but the elegant flowing handwriting was unmistakable. It was not Jamal handwriting. It was not Beatrice handwriting. It was addressed directly to me. Nia, my beautiful daughter, the script read. It was my biological father handwriting. The man who had allegedly died in a tragic accident, leaving me entirely at the mercy of the monsters who had stolen my life. I stared at the sealed wax, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I had uncovered every financial secret, every offshore account, and every lie Jamal and Beatrice had ever told. But as I held the yellowed envelope in my trembling hands, I realized that the deepest, most dangerous secret of all had been hiding in this safe the entire time. I pressed my thumb beneath the flap of the yellowed envelope. The dark red wax cracked and splintered, falling like dried blood onto the polished mahogany surface of the desk. I pulled the folded parchment free, taking a slow, steady breath as the scent of aged paper and faint pipe tobacco wafted upward. It was a scent that instantly transported me back to the safety of a library I had not seen since I was a child. The handwriting was indeed my grandfather's. He was the man who had raised me, the man who had been my true father in every conceivable way that mattered before his sudden, tragic passing left me at the absolute mercy of Beatrice. I unfolded the heavy paper and flattened it against the desk. My dearest Nia, the letter began, written in his sharp, precise strokes. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means Beatrice has finally shown you exactly who she is. I have spent my entire life building this real estate empire from the ground up, creating a legacy that I intended to be your absolute protection in this world. But my greatest regret, my deepest failure, is the realization that my success has inadvertently made you a target. I traced the ink with my index finger, listening to his deep, resonant voice echoing across the decades. I know Beatrice, the letter continued. I know the depth of her vanity and the terrifying scope of her bottomless greed. She is a woman who values zip codes and country club memberships over human souls. She looks at you, and she does not see a daughter or a child to be loved. She sees a vault. She sees an obstacle standing between her and the social status she craves with a desperate, pathetic hunger. I have structured the family trusts and the corporate holdings to protect your future as best as I can, but I am not naive. Paper and legal ink can only do so much against a woman who is entirely willing to trade her morality for luxury. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, letting the profound weight of his words settle over me. He had always known exactly what kind of monster lived inside his house. Beatrice will try to break you, Nia, He wrote his words, slicing through 30 years of manufactured doubt. She will try to make you feel small, defective, and unworthy because she is absolutely terrified of your potential. Do not ever let her convince you that you are anything less than extraordinary. You must understand that the real estate portfolios, the international bank accounts, the corporate titles, none of that is your true inheritance. Let Beatrice chase the money if she must. Let her drown in her own shallow ambition. The ink on the final paragraph was pressed deeper into the paper as if he had gripped the pen with fierce, desperate urgency. Your brilliant mind is the real empire, Nia. Your intellect, your resilience, your ability to analyze and see the world with absolute freezing clarity, that is your true power. Money can be stolen, assets can be liquidated, houses can be burned to the ground, but your mind is an impregnable fortress that Beatrice can never breach. Trust your brilliance, my beautiful girl. You were always destined to be the architect of your own life. I love you more than this world could ever contain. I lowered the parchment. The sprawling, opulent office around me felt completely different now. For 3 decades, Beatrice had orchestrated a masterclass in psychological warfare. She had isolated a grieving 12-year-old girl, locking me in a sterile psychiatric ward simply to clear her path to the corporate accounts. She had spent my entire life gaslighting me, trying to convince me that I was a broken burden, a fragile liability that needed to be managed and hidden away. I had spent countless years fighting a phantom war against my own self-worth, wondering why I was so uniquely unlovable. But sitting here in the silent aftermath of her total destruction, holding the tangible, undeniable proof of my grandfather's absolute devotion, the final piece of Beatrice's toxic puzzle clicked permanently into place. I was never broken. I was never unloved. I was simply a brilliant child trapped in a house with a parasite who could only survive by feeding on my light and stealing my resources. Beatrice's cruelty had never been a reflection of my flaws. It was entirely a reflection of her own empty, rotting core. I felt a sudden creeping warmth trace a slow path down my left cheek. I raised my hand and touched the moisture with my fingertips, staring at the dampness on my skin. It was my first tear in 30 years. It was not a tear of grief. It was not a tear of sorrow or lingering pain or regret for the family I never had. It was a tear of profound, absolute validation. The terrified little girl who had been dragged screaming from her home was finally and completely vindicated. She was safe. She was cherished. Her mind had saved her just as her grandfather had predicted. I carefully folded the parchment and slipped it into the inner breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit jacket, keeping it pressed close to my heart. The past was officially closed. The ghosts had been permanently put to rest. The emotional ledger was finally balanced, but the financial ledger still required one final monumental adjustment. I reached across the mahogany desk and picked up the heavy receiver of the executive phone. I bypassed the standard corporate switchboard, entirely punching in a private encrypted international number. I listened to the secure line route through a series of digital handshakes across the Atlantic. The line connected with a soft, definitive click, connecting me directly to the senior managing director of my primary wealth management firm in Zurich. Ms. Davis, the Swiss banker, answered instantly, his tone radiating absolute professional discretion. "How may I assist you today? I need to initiate a massive transfer." I stated, my voice perfectly steady and cold. "Liquidate every single remaining liquid asset associated with the Vanguard merger and prepare to move the capital. We are going to bleed this empire completely dry." The massive international wire transfer executed by my Zurich team did more than just drain the last remaining drops of Beatrice and Jamal illicit capital. It fundamentally cleansed the money. I had stripped the stolen wealth of its toxic history and transformed it into a weapon of absolute righteous creation. I did not want to merely hoard the millions my grandfather had intended for me. I wanted to forge a legacy that would stand as a permanent, indestructible monument to the truth. 1 week later, my driver navigated the sleek black town car down a winding, neglected stretch of highway on the bleak outskirts of Atlanta. The sky above was a brilliant, piercing blue, offering a stark contrast to the grim, decaying architecture that slowly loomed into view at the end of the road. The St. Jude Juvenile Detention Center stood exactly as I remembered it. It was a brutal fortress of weathered gray concrete, wrapped in tight coils of rusted razor wire. 30 years had passed since Beatrice paid a corrupt family court judge to classify a grieving 12-year-old girl as a violent threat, dragging me kicking and screaming through those heavy iron doors. I rolled down the tinted window, letting the harsh morning air hit my face. I remembered the suffocating smell of bleach and damp cinderblock. I remembered the cold, sleepless nights spent curled on a thin mattress, wondering why my family had thrown me away like garbage. I stepped out of the town car, my designer heels crunching against the loose gravel of the shoulder. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. The terrified child who had wept behind those concrete walls was gone. The woman standing outside the gates was a titan. Attorney Davis was already waiting for me, leaning against the hood of his vehicle. He stood up straight as I approached, extending a thick leather portfolio. "The final deeds cleared this morning, Ms. Davis," he said, his voice laced with deep professional respect. "You now own the entire perimeter, all 300 acres. I took the portfolio and opened it. Inside were the pristine, legally binding documents granting me absolute, unencumbered ownership of the vast expanse of land that completely surrounded the detention center on all four sides. I had not come here to reminisce. I had come here to conquer. I looked past the razor wire to the sprawling empty fields adjacent to the prison. A fleet of massive yellow excavators and heavy industrial bulldozers were already lined up, their diesel engines idling with a low, powerful rumble that shook the ground beneath my feet. A team of elite structural engineers and urban developers stood nearby, holding rolled-up architectural blueprints. I walked over to the lead architect, who immediately unfurled the master plan across the hood of a nearby truck. It was a breathtaking vision of modern glass steel and lush green spaces. "We break ground today," I instructed, my voice cutting through the mechanical roar of the idling machinery. "I want the main academic building erected first, followed by the legal advocacy clinics, the art studios, and the residential housing wings." The project was a $75 million educational campus, specifically designed for at-risk, youth-emancipated minors and falsely accused teens who had been discarded by the system. It would offer state-of-the-art laboratories, fully funded university scholarships, and a dedicated team of aggressive defense attorneys to fight for children who had no voice. It was designed to completely dwarf the adjacent detention center, casting a literal and metaphorical shadow over the concrete prison. "We have finalized the incorporation documents," the architect confirmed, tapping the bold, elegant lettering printed at the top of the blueprint. I stared at the name. The Arthur Sterling Institute for Youth Advocacy. I touched the inner pocket of my coat, where my grandfather-aged letter rested safely against my heart. He had warned me about Beatrice. He had told me that my brilliant mind was my true empire. I was finally building that empire in his name. I made a silent, unbreakable vow as I watched the first excavator dig its massive steel teeth into the earth. No child in this city would ever be silenced, erased, or thrown away the way I was. I was building a sanctuary with walls too thick for any greedy, narcissistic adult to ever breach. The bitter coldness that had resided in my chest for 3 decades finally thawed completely, replaced by a fierce, burning purpose. I left the architects to their work and walked toward the sleek, temporary administrative trailer set up on the edge of the construction site. The interior was a hub of buzzing activity, with my new corporate team coordinating contractors and fielding calls. I walked past the busy desks and poured myself a cup of black coffee from the break station. In the corner of the trailer, a large flat-screen television was mounted to the wall, tuned to a local Atlanta news network. The volume was low, but the bright red breaking news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen caught my immediate attention. I stopped with the coffee cup halfway to my lips, my eyes locking onto the high-definition broadcast. The news anchor voice filtered through the room, detailing the spectacular historic downfall of Atlanta's most prominent real estate dynasty. The camera cut from the polished news desk to live aerial footage hovering over the federal courthouse downtown. A massive crowd of reporters, paparazzi, and angry, defrauded investors had swarmed the courthouse steps, held back by a line of heavily armed police officers. The heavy brass doors of the federal transport van swung open. There was Beatrice, there was Jamal. They were entirely stripped of their carefully curated armor. There were no bespoke Italian suits. There were no diamond tennis bracelets. There was no aristocratic arrogance. They were shackled together at the wrists and ankles, metal chains clanking heavily against the pavement as they shuffled forward. They were both wearing oversized, bright orange county prison jumpsuits. Jamal looked gaunt and hollowed out, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. Beatrice was keeping her head down, her face pale and devoid of makeup, shrinking away from the exploding flashbulbs like a cornered animal. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the people who had tried to bury me walk headfirst into their own permanent ruin. 6 months later, the oppressive humidity of the Atlanta summer had given way to a crisp, biting winter. The federal courthouse downtown was a monolithic structure of cold gray stone and heavy tinted glass. It felt entirely appropriate for the permanent burial of the Sterling family. I sat in the front row of the gallery directly behind the prosecution table. The wooden benches behind me were packed to absolute capacity. The room was a sea of defrauded investors, former country club associates who had come to revel in the spectacular scandal, and a legion of local and national reporters hungering for the final chapter of the city's most infamous corporate collapse. I wore a sharply tailored, pristine white suit. It was a deliberate, calculated contrast to the dark, somber tones of the courtroom, and an even sharper contrast to the neon orange jumpsuits that Beatrice, Jamal, and Harper were forced to wear. The heavy oak doors at the side of the courtroom swung open. 2 armed federal marshals led them out. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. Jail had stripped away every last ounce of their manufactured superiority. Harper entered first. Her expensive highlights had grown out into harsh, jagged roots, and her famously manicured nails were bitten down to the quick. She walked with her head bowed, her shoulders curled inward as if trying to physically shrink away from the hundreds of eyes boring into her. Jamal followed, his tall frame stooped and hollowed. The arrogant visionary CEO persona had been entirely devoured by the reality of his confinement. He looked like an empty, terrified shell. But it was Beatrice who commanded my attention. The undisputed matriarch of Atlanta elite society looked utterly decimated. Her perfect posture was gone, replaced by a fragile, trembling shuffle. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the courtroom highlighted every deep wrinkle and line of exhaustion on her pale, unadorned face. She looked small, pathetic, and entirely ordinary. The heavy silence in the room was broken only by the clanking of their ankle chains as they were guided to the defendant table. The federal judge presiding over the case was a stern, unforgiving man, with a reputation for handing down maximum sentences for white-collar crimes. He adjusted his glasses, peering down from the elevated bench with a look of absolute sheer disgust. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He opened the thick sentencing binder and turned his gaze directly toward Harper. "Harper Sterling." The judge began, his voice echoing loudly through the silent courtroom. "You actively participated in a massive conspiracy to launder millions of dollars through offshore accounts. You happily reaped the financial rewards of a stolen corporate empire while aggressively attempting to silence the true heir to that fortune. Your complete lack of remorse and your documented history of verbal and psychological abuse toward the victim demonstrate a fundamentally toxic character." Harper began to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking as the reality of her choices finally crashed down upon her. "For your felony convictions regarding wire fraud and money laundering, I am sentencing you to 7 years in federal prison," the judge declared, striking the gavel. "However, your punishment does not end there. Because you are not a native citizen and have now been convicted of multiple aggravated federal felonies, your visa and citizenship status are hereby revoked. Immediately upon the completion of your sentence, you will be permanently deported and barred from ever re-entering the country." Harper let out a strangled, agonizing wail, collapsing into her chair. Her luxury American dream had officially ended in total banishment. The judge did not pause. He turned his piercing glare to Jamal. "Jamal Sterling, you are the architect of this corporate fraud. You utilized your position to forge documents, siphon assets, and systematically dismantle a legacy that did not belong to you. You betrayed your fiduciary duty to your investors, and far more despicably, you betrayed your duty to your own adopted sister. You are sentenced to 22 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Jamal did not cry. He simply stared blankly at the polished wood of the table, his jaw ticking slightly. His entire life had been a lie, and now he would spend the rest of it trapped in a concrete box. Finally, the judge turned to Beatrice. The courtroom held its collective breath. Beatrice Sterling, the judge, said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a case of such profound moral bankruptcy. You orchestrated the theft of a real estate empire, but your financial crimes pale in comparison to your personal ones. You fabricated medical records, paid off corrupt officials, and utilized a psychiatric hold to lock a grieving 12-year-old girl in a facility simply to steal her inheritance. You stole her childhood. You stole her family. You treated a human being like collateral damage in your greedy pursuit of social status. Beatrice was weeping openly now, her frail hands shaking violently as she gripped the edge of the table. For the orchestration of this massive fraud and the sheer unadulterated cruelty of your actions, I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison. The gavel cracked against the sounding block with the finality of a gunshot. 25 years. For a woman of Beatrice's age, it was an absolute, undeniable life sentence. She would draw her final breath behind bars, entirely forgotten by the high society she had worshipped. The marshals immediately stepped forward, grasping the defendants by their arms to lead them back to the holding cells. As they were pulled away from the table, Beatrice turned her head. Her eyes searched the front row until they locked directly onto mine. The mask was completely gone. There was no hatred left in her gaze, no arrogant dismissal, no icy superiority. There was only raw, unadulterated terror. Her eyes silently screamed for mercy, begging me to somehow stop the inevitable, to save her from the cold, dark reality of the hell she had built for herself. I sat perfectly still in my white suit, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I looked into the eyes of the monster who had terrorized my childhood. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply offered her one slow, deliberate nod. It was the ultimate acknowledgement of her total, absolute defeat. I stood up, turned my back on her weeping form, and walked confidently down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy brass doors pushed open, yielding easily to my touch. I stepped out of the courthouse and breathed in the sharp, freezing winter air. The blinding Atlanta sunlight reflected off the towering skyscrapers around me. I walked down the wide granite steps toward the curb, where a sleek black Maybach was idling quietly. My security detail immediately stepped forward, opening the heavy rear door. As I slid into the soft, pristine leather seat, my phone buzzed softly in the pocket of my coat. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a single text message from Attorney Davis. "The empire is fully yours." I locked my phone screen and let the device slip from my hand onto the pristine leather seat of the Maybach. The heavy engine hummed beneath me as the car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the chaotic flow of downtown Atlanta traffic. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not need to. That chapter of my life, the one defined by terror, theft, and gaslighting, was permanently closed. The ink was dry. The ledger was finally balanced. The scene fades, dissolving the bright, harsh winter sunlight of the courthouse steps into the dim, warm ambiance of the present day. I am sitting in the center of my penthouse, exactly where this story began. The fire is still crackling softly in the modern glass hearth, casting a warm, amber glow across the polished concrete floors. The city of Atlanta stretches out before me, an endless, glittering grid of gold and white lights, pulsing with life against the pitch-black night sky. It is the exact same city that Beatrice and Jamal once believed they owned. It is the same city where they orchestrated their monstrous little plays, hiding their absolute rot behind country club memberships and charity galas. Now it is my city. I stand up from the plush velvet armchair, the heavy crystal tumbler of bourbon resting comfortably in my right hand. The ice clinks gently against the glass, a crisp, clean sound in the absolute quiet of the penthouse. I walk slowly toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, my bare feet soundless against the floor. I stop just inches from the thick glass, looking down at the sprawling metropolis below. Every towering skyscraper, every illuminated corporate logo, every intersection tells a story of power. For 30 years, my power was actively suppressed. It was locked away in a sterile psychiatric ward, buried under forged legal documents, and deliberately suffocated by the very people who were supposed to protect me. They built their entire fraudulent kingdom on the premise that I would remain a silent, obedient victim. They gambled their entire existence on the arrogant assumption that a traumatized 12-year-old girl would never grow up to understand the complex mechanics of their theft. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of trauma. It does not always break you. Sometimes, if you survive the initial crushing weight of it, trauma acts as a forge. It burns away the naive illusions of childhood and leaves behind cold, impenetrable steel. I spent decades honing my mind, sharpening my intellect, turning myself into a weapon they could never comprehend, let alone defeat. I learned their rules. I studied their systems. I mastered the very financial networks they used to hide my grandfather's legacy. I look down at my faint reflection in the glass. The woman staring back is not angry anymore. The simmering, white-hot rage that fueled me through the late nights, the endless forensic audits, and the tense boardroom battles has entirely evaporated. It has been replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. The Arthur Sterling Institute for Youth Advocacy is fully operational now. Every single day, hundreds of at-risk teens walk through its heavy doors, receiving the elite education, the aggressive legal defense, and the unwavering emotional support that was violently denied to me. They are learning that their past does not dictate their future. They are learning how to fight back against a system designed to crush them. I walk the halls of that campus, and I see my grandfather's legacy living and breathing in the eyes of those children. The real estate empire that Jamal and Beatrice polluted has been completely sterilized. Vanguard has been dismantled, rebranded, and repurposed. The massive profits no longer fund lavish offshore vacations or absurd vanity projects. They fund scholarships, they fund community housing, they fund the future. I took the very machinery of their greed and turned it into an engine for genuine systemic change. I can imagine Beatrice sitting in her tiny concrete cell tonight, listening to the heavy iron doors slide shut. She has no designer makeup. She has no adoring audience. She has only the deafening echo of her own irrelevance. Jamal is likely staring at a cinder block wall, desperately trying to calculate a corporate maneuver that will never come. Harper is somewhere thousands of miles away, stripped of her American luxury, forced to rebuild a life from absolute scratch. The universe has a beautiful, terrifying way of demanding equilibrium. They stole my youth, so I took their future. I take a slow breath, letting the silence of the penthouse wash over me. It is a beautiful, hard-won silence. There are no more lies to untangle. There are no more hidden safes to crack. There are no more federal agents to dispatch. They thought they could bury me because they controlled the narrative. But they forgot one thing: I am an auditor. I always follow the paper trail and the math never lies. The numbers were always there, waiting patiently in the dark for someone brave enough to shine a light on them. Beatrice relied on the illusion of class. Jamal relied on the illusion of competence. Harper relied on the illusion of innocence. But illusions shatter the moment they are subjected to rigorous, unapologetic scrutiny. 2 plus 2 will never equal 5, no matter how loudly you scream it or how much money you spend trying to buy a different answer. I simply did the math. I tallied their sins and I presented them with the ultimate unavoidable bill. The camera slowly begins to push forward, moving past the crackling fireplace and the modern velvet furniture. It glides smoothly across the polished floor, closing the distance between us. I turn away from the glittering skyline and face the lens directly. The dolly continues its slow, deliberate crawl, pushing in tighter until the frame is filled entirely by my face. The warm lighting catches the amber liquid in my glass and reflects a fierce, absolute calm in my eyes. I am no longer the victim. I am the architect. I raise my glass of bourbon directly to the lens. Cheers to the scapegoats. Our time always comes. I take a sip turn and walk off screen. Blackout. End of script.